Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Danube conference. Well, this year's conference is quite different to what we are used to. This conference will be held online as a live stream because of the well-known circumstances. But looking at today's presentations, I'm sure that an interesting and results-driven discussion on the future of the Danube region will take place even online. Last year, our conference focused on Brexit and the impact it has on Europe. At that time, nobody would have guessed that the far-reaching developments for Europe would have been outbalanced by far of the effects the current pandemic causes. The assessment of economic, societal, and cultural consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic is yet not fully possible. Currently, we are facing a Europe far removed from the unity it has grown to form. Temporarily closed borders, severely restricted freedom of travel and mobility, and a coordination of national approaches in order to combat the pandemic, but sometimes in need of improvement. Europe is one of the regions that has been severely affected by the pandemic worldwide. And within Europe, the countries of Eastern Europe have been economically badly hit. The present imbalance in economic terms and concerning health sector is particularly significant in view of the current crisis. The economy is expected to recover quickly once a vaccine against the SARS-CoV-2 virus has been developed and made available to the entire population. However, the main question is what long-term disruptions in society have probably occurred? What consequences have societal systems to expect? What kind of opportunities do the coping strategies of the pandemic offer, and how can the countries of the Danube region make use of them? Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, the current situation demonstrates how difficult it is to make choices under highly complex circumstances. The pandemic is one of those. The results, mutual effects, and the right solutions are uncertain and even more unpredictable. In this situation, science plays a special role. Scientifically sound methods are not only required to analyze complex issues and systems, it is also science that will initially free us from the pandemic by developing a vaccine. And again, science will provide decision makers with the data and analysis on the basis of which target-oriented decisions can be made for the post-pandemic period. I see evidence as the basis of every analysis and the following recommendation, and transdisciplinarity as the path of choice to find viable solutions and thus ways out of the crisis. Modern science stands for both crucial elements, evidence and transdisciplinarity. From the viewpoint of a university, the Danube University Krems, I am a representative for, I am primarily addressing the cooperation of science and society in a transdisciplinary understanding. In other words, science jointly developing solutions on an equal footing with representatives from practice, administration, the healthcare system, business, and civil society initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, today's conference contrasts possible utopian developments with the dystopian consequences in Europe in the post-corona period. As I am an optimist by profession, I would like to recall the great potential the countries of the Danube region hold. Shifting societal, social, and economic progress was feasible as the developments of its countries in the past decades have shown. Even more potential lies ahead. Geopolitical changes resulting from the pandemic, as many experts see it, offer a number of opportunities for the countries of the Danube region. To consider international supply and value chain, for example, could turn out to be an advantage for the business location in many countries of the Danube region and the Western Balkans. Keyword nearshoring. Or let's think about digitalization, which has also been strongly stimulated and utilized in the Danube region. Using digital instruments cleverly could lead to the faster reduction of disparities. I see another aspect unfold, the cultural diversity of the Danube region being an important region within Europe. We should recall the European idea when we think about solutions to overcome the current crisis. This idea, which is Europe united in diversity. Therein lies the strength of this political, societal, cultural, and of course, economic project, Europe. With this optimistic attitude, I look forward to the upcoming presentations and contributions. At that point, I would like to thank the conference's organizers, the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe, for preparing this online conference. Furthermore, I would like to thank the other cooperation partners, the Argedoner as well as the province of Lower Austria, for their support. And of course, I want to thank you, the participants, to be with us, to join this online conference. I wish you and today's event lots of success and fresh insights. And as I already mentioned, our important cooperation partner, the province of Lower Austria, I would like to directly hand for the video welcome address by Mr. EICHTINGER.
Chairman Busek, Rector FAULHAMMER, Rector HASENAUER, Professor SELMAYR, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you to this year's Danube conference, even though the format of the conference is quite different from what we would like it to be and what we are used to. First of all, I would like to convey to you the best greetings of our governor, Johanna Mikl-Leitner. The working title of today's conference, Post-Corona in the Danube region, Utopia or Dystopia, the common European future, can be taken as a reference to the permanent struggle for a clear vision for Europe's future, and as a reminder that for the time being, we are looking towards an unknown post-Corona future. Contrary to what many people think, all European institutions have been dealing intensively with the Corona crisis ever since the outbreak of the pandemic, and have offered enormous support to EU member countries. However, we have also become aware of the weaknesses of the European Union. It must be our shared goal to learn our lessons from COVID, to draw conclusions from current developments, and to take advantage of newly gained experience to strengthen the united Europe of the future. In this context, cross-border cooperation between regions is of particular importance. Sharing ideas cross-border and in close cooperation with our neighbors, this is essential for us in Lower Austria. This cooperation works well, and we want it to be further intensified, making it sustainable, especially in those areas which are currently under enormous stress and confronted with huge challenges: healthcare and the labor market. Cross-border healthcare has become a reality for Lower Austria and its neighbors. The best example is our Health Across initiative, which has earned international recognition through various projects which we accomplished with our partners in the Czech Republic, in Slovakia, and in Hungary. The Danube region in particular plays a central role for Lower Austria. It provides a fertile ground for successful projects along the river Danube, where regional interests take second place behind the pursuit of shared and common goals. Intensive cooperation between the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe and the working community of the Danube regions, as well as increasingly close ties with the Danube University Krems have opened up new perspectives for the Danube region and contributed to its success. Ladies and gentlemen, I am convinced that it takes a joint effort at the European, national and regional levels to build a stronger union for all European citizens. I would like to thank all stakeholders and partners for making this important conference possible. I greatly appreciate your commitment and I wish you fruitful discussions and a successful conference.
First of all, I want to say many thanks for the introductory remarks by Rector FAULHAMMER and also by my old friend Martin EICHTINGER on behalf of the government of Lower Austria. I think it's an outstanding opportunity in the current situation with all these connections with the different crises, difficulties, challenges, and so we have, I think, to discuss what are the priorities, what are the answers, or even to confess that we have no answer and we have to consider what to do to overcome all these problems. I think usually everybody in all the comments in the media and by politicians said we are living in a crisis. I'm fighting for the importance of the word crisis. I learned the old Greek language. Crisis is coming from krino. That means to distinct and to decide. And I think a time of crisis is a time for distinction and decision making. And I think in this direction we have to push. I think there's a certain negativism running around, all the difficulties and overcoming us and how horrible it is and so on and so on. Let's stop it. I think we have to get a positive approach. It's not necessary that you are saying we are happy to have these difficulties, but we have to say we have the possibilities to overcome, even in a crucial moment of whole Europe. I want to repeat the following statements which are always now done on Europe. What is Europe? 5 to 7% of the global population. We are still a little bit more than 20% of the economic success. We are consuming 50% of the benefits of our society, which is a little bit too much in comparison with other parts, and is creating a lot of difficulties and challenges. I think this is the situation of Europe. But, and this we have to say, we have the capacity, I think, to overcome this. I think if we are looking to science and research, if we are looking to philosophy, if we are looking to the principle of the ethics and so on, I think it is extremely important to do it. That's the reason why I'm happy to welcome you all by this conference with the title Post-Corona in the Danube region, Utopia and Dystopia. I think common Europe future is quite clear. I have to set quite clear, if we are not able to handle this, then Europe will be marginalized. And I think that makes no sense because we produced a lot in the past. It's always nice to look to the past, but it is not enough. Let's look to the future and to the obligation of possibilities which we have in the future. So a special welcome to all of those who are sharing us from different directions. Many thanks also to the younger generation looking in this and giving us an echo, which might be also very helpful for the common future. So far, my introductory remark on behalf of the Institute of the Danube region and Central Europe. I welcome you, and I'm saying many thanks to all those who supported us. First of all, I have to say many thanks to the first speaker making a keynote address. It is Dragan PROLE. He is full professor of philosophy, especially on ontology and contemporary philosophy in Novi Sad. He is a guest lecturer at the Academy of Arts concerning aesthetics and contemporary aesthetics. He's a member of an editorial board of several philosophical journals and so on and so on. And he had over not only about Southeast Europe, but also on other parts, because He did study visits in Berlin, Weimar, Leuven, Graz, Heidelberg, and Vienna. And he has been also invited as a visiting lecturer at several universities, Leuven especially. And I warm welcome you that you did the Husserl Memorial Lecture 2019, because Husserl has a special importance also for our region, even if I'm looking to the developments. As I was in contact with my friends during the changes around the downfall of the Iron Curtain in Czechoslovakia in this time and in Poland, Husserl and phenomenology played a very important role. So far, I'm quite happy to have one who is looking also to Husserl here on board. I think that's it. We can do a lot of remarks of what you did, best books, and so on and so on. But I think we are now very interested to listen to you. Many thanks you are joining us. The floor is yours, Professor PROLE. A warm welcome.
Thank you, Professor Busek, for your kind invitation. Dr. FAULHAMMER, dear colleagues and participants, I send you regards from my office, from the Faculty of Philosophy, next to the Danube coast, 100 meters away. And as a foreigner, I would like firstly to express my deepest condolences to all citizens of Republic of Austria, especially to the families of the victims of what happened last week, this senseless attack. And I was happy to hear that some bridges and fountains in Serbia equipped with the light were colored one night with colors of Austria flag, red, white, red, and that was a symbolic kind of sign of solidarity with the citizens of Austria. I'm convinced that Vienna and the whole Austria will show some kind of let's say strength and concentration, and that Vienna will be in the future still the best city in the world for everyday living. And that's why I had a need to say a couple of words related to those events. And what I have to say is that my contribution is entitled Mental Tsunami, Being Afraid of the Invisible. I hope that I won't disappoint you, and I will provide some insights for the beginning of our conversations. The appearance of coronavirus in the Danube region pointed out that the behavior of the state endangered by the pandemic can be similar to the behavior of an infected individual. When we get sick, we turn exclusively to ourselves. We put everything else and everybody else aside. Thus, the states have closed their borders rapidly in order to turn to provide medical resources needed to deal with the pandemic. In a little while, the domestic market has gained primacy. International trade in medical equipment seems to have been suspended. This has caused a bizarre misunderstanding and a new way of disappointment in the EU for countries like Serbia. The Chinese are coming to meet us, in other words, to sell their medical equipment to us, and some, of course, anonymous EU countries are even trying to take over our agreed upon orders by carrying cash like mobsters and taking everything over immediately. EU countries have banned almost everyone else from entering, regardless of the current situation with the pandemic and the numbers of those infected. Logically, it recreated a feeling of abandonment and isolation, which my generation got to know very well during the visa regime from 1992 to 2009. Several months later, the promised package of financial assistance for the countries of the Western Balkans followed, 8 + 1 billion euros in total, warmly welcomed by the government, but rather lukewarmly by the government-friendly media. When an individual is in crisis, it is difficult to say whether he or she would prefer a friendly handshake and a sincere hug or financial support. When the state behaves as an individual, it emphasizes emotional pre-political moments. which means that a friendly gesture of affection is far more important to it than significant financial help. It differs from culture to culture, but it seems to us that the countries of the Western Balkans tend to solve the political problems by pre-political means. Following that logic, we can understand how it might be possible that the Serbian president calls his Chinese colleague "my brother Xi." When the state turns into an individual, it cares far more about the handshake and the hug for exactly what is strictly forbidden during epidemics. The experience of living in which a new unknown virus circulates brings with it the need to revise traditional philosophical terminology. Based on what we have experienced so far, coronavirus causes neither fear nor anxiety, but it is a unique blend for which we still do not have a name. According to the inherent difference between fear and anxiety, fear is always induced by a concrete object or phenomenon. Some people are afraid of the dark, or stray dogs, or speeding. Some people are afraid of heights or of commitment. No matter how different the occasions and intensities, all fears have something in common. There is always something we are afraid of, so facing things that scare us activates fear. Fear is reactive by nature, caused by external provocation, and as a rule provides a standard response to it. Whether we are screaming, looking away, turning our backs, or running away, fear is most often manifested. The lack of visual threat information increases the activity of warning. To illustrate this, I will quote a warning from the novel Pestilence and Fear, published in 2018. Serbian writer Bule Žulić has depicted the real plague epidemic in Irig, in small city south of Novi Sad in 1795. The epidemic has been lasting for 7 months, with more than half of its 5,000 inhabitants having died from the disease. Reacting to the lethargic atmosphere in the city, Dr. Budaj addresses the Serbian Archbishop using utterly dramatic vocabulary. Pandemic circumstances normalize the dying on a large scale and create the spirit of indifference. Quote, "Don't you see that death in Irig is no longer a punishment, but salvation? We must intimidate your flock with something more terrible and threaten it many more times than going to hell, because your flock and its local shepherds do not seem to care that hundreds, thousands of them are dying, and that there will be no one left to close the eyes of the diseased and to follow them to the other world. Stick with the people from Irig," unquote. I choose this sentence because I think personally that the lethargic atmosphere is most characteristic consequence of this coronavirus. With anxiety, there is no international object. The discomfort it causes has no obvious reason or trigger. Hence, we cannot know what we are afraid of. Since we do not recognize the reason for anxiety, we cannot know how to react on it, and even less can we offer a solution. Therefore, the manifestation of anxiety can paralyze the whole body. Fear is channeled, directed. There is discharge or reaction. Anxiety is unarticulated, hence we suffer it psychosomatically. The whole organism feels anxiety, the tension is total, and the alarmed body is in an unusual symbiosis with psychological tension. That is why asking us to feel more anxious is hard to do in practice, because every part of us is saying we need to get rid of the anxiety. Our standard response chooses to disregard it. Another difference concerns the condition of fear, which usually passes together with the disappearance of its cause. If a stray dog moves down the street, or the driver slows down to an acceptable speed, our manifested fear no longer has a reason to exist. On the other hand, anxiety itself is usually unreasonable, so it cannot, like fear, count on the game of appearing and disappearing following the presence or absence of its trigger. Anxiety is present without anything else existing. Anxiety doesn't need any cause. Therefore, it is not surprising that anxiety has no visible cause nor a recognizable reaction. Since there is no tangible reason in the immediate environment, Anxiety seems to pursue beyond immediacy, hence the tendency to connect it with a transcendent, metaphysical, or religious instance. At the very beginning of the mentioned novel, the doctor, Andrea Budaj, meets a blind gusle player who asked him. Gusle is an old-fashioned string instrument with only one string, famous by epic songs. Quote, "Are you the one who cures the infected ones?" "For the time being, I'm just counting the victims," answered the medic. "Are they listening to you?" "They will," self-confidently replied Budaj. "How do you think you can make them listen when you don't have neither a rifle nor a gusle?" Unquote. It is these two means that have proven to be the most effective. On the one hand, the measures introduced by state and supported by armed law enforcement agencies, and on the other, the choir song performed by a team of epidemiologists repeated like a mantra every day. Apparently, the difference between fear and anxiety, the experience of the individual and the community faced with the virus, does not fit into either. The virus is not visible, it cannot be felt, it cannot be experienced directly. Following that trait, it fits into the register of anxiety. The virus is not visible, but the consequences it has on people, especially people of certain age, obesity, and chronic diseases, are dramatically recognizable. Although it comes from the realm of the invisible, the severe and unpredictable health consequences that the virus causes sow global fear. Maybe the standard flu has similar mortality, but we know it, we have already solutions in the form of vaccines. We can't say the same about coronavirus because we still don't have a cure or a vaccine. The source of the global panic and extremely unusual transition from mocking the funniest virus in history to imposing a harsh curfew, from frivolous and arbitrary media ridicule to economic vulnerability of millions of people, hampered by unforeseen financial shocks, can become comprehensible only if we keep in mind that coronavirus combines the invisible, a trademark of all viruses, and the aleatory, because it is an unknown, different, new species. When the visible and the unknown unite, they are destined to cause anxiety, but the expected reaction is not a metaphysical mood of anxiety, but an extremely specific, practical, accurate reaction inherent in fear. Encountering the virus causes nervousness because the experience indicates anxiety, but it must produce fear to be able to cope with it. The transition from anxiety to fear is never spontaneous or natural. It can only be artificially induced. We all know the phenomenon of that artificial source. Its name is media-generated panic. Old-fashioned gusle has been replaced by new media. The first task of the mass media in the encounter with coronavirus was to favor immaturity and infancy. Adults can become mere children when we force them to organize the principles of their daily actions towards prohibitions. Simply put, panic-mediated medical recommendations refreshed the thesis of the mystical foundation of authority. Don't do this because it's forbidden. You are endangering the healthcare system if you do not respect the prohibitions and do not follow the recommendations. It seems that immaturity is not only inherent to the adversaries of recommendations, but also to their creators. We don't seem to remember the causes of borrowing, under quotation marks, on a comparable scale. For example, while announcing a new series of binding measures in a televised address scheduled for the evening, Wednesday, October 14th, and at 8 p.m., Emmanuel Macron stated, "Toutes les options sont sur la table." The next day, October 15th, Serbian Minister of Health Lončar publicly announced literally the same sentence, "Sve opcije su na stolu." Literal appropriation without attribution or citation in the wired 21st century seems to be an irrefutable proof of infantilism. Therefore, it seems logical that the trust in institutions responsible for facing coronavirus barely affects over 1/4 of the population. A Eurobarometer survey conducted in July 2020 also showed that in Serbia, only 26% of respondents tend to trust institutions, compared to 43% in the EU, and 60 or 48% do not. The infantilizations of adults, however, does not result in a new kind of equality. Even it is related to the creation of a new unprofessional community of the immature. Whatever the ban on movement is in force or not, everyone is recommended to reduce their life to private space, and the private space is a place of differences. The discourse on equal treatment of all citizens during the pandemic results in the renewal of the differences. The use of parks and playgrounds is forbidden to everyone, and it especially affected those who do not have their own yards and gardens. The pictures of a massive exodus from Paris before the official lockdown on Friday, 13th of October, capture mostly the owners of properties in the countryside. It is the poorest strata of society who are suffering most from the onslaught of coronavirus. The leading paradox of anti-coronavirus measures released through closure, enormous restrictions for the release of the virus. The measures of imprisoning citizens in Orwell's house prison are worthy, only that war is no longer peace. Instead, house arrest is freedom from the virus. Restrictions on freedom in the name of liberation. The dream of all governments is to establish control over the virus. Waiting for that to come true, it controls its citizens. Modernity creates a sense of security to the extent that it exercises control over the natural phenomena it faces. The pandemic is a living testimony to the lack of control, to the global human vulnerability, which becomes virtually mitigated via media when it is covered by the rhetoric of war. The encounter with an unknown virus is an encounter with the aleatory, and it always provokes insecurity and nervousness. To get rid of nervousness, Europeans are happy to activate warrior rhetoric and simulate war circumstances. The epic spirit is being revived. Communities need heroes capable of winning battles. The French seems to have taken the lead, again with President Emmanuel Macron declaring war, nous sommes en guerre, in early March. It was not particularly difficult for the authorities in Serbia to take over the symbolic action of warrior language, counting on the rich experience of its citizens with the real war. The deceased are officially recorded as fallen warriors, as those who lost their battle against the virus. The revival of war rhetoric is pretty dangerous, especially in the region where it must have become clear long ago that there is no victor in the war, that everyone loses the war. On the other hand, the end of the war should bring liberation. Peace should come after battles, but we cannot count on that because the virus still remains with us. The only question is to what extent it circulates and how much it can endanger us. In addition to the ones of war, there are narratives of general insecurity. Thus, a member of Serbian crisis staff said, quote, "I don't know if the time will ever come to say that we are safe," unquote. But she previously failed to notice that we have long since come out of the age of false security, as if Dr. Kisić had never heard of Kafka, for whom 100 years ago our feeling of security was equal to our stupidity. The dystopic view of the pandemic world will notice that it is directed against sociability, since its effects start and end with the proclamation of alienation through the notorious social distancing. Dystopia, deprived of the rhetoric of an esoteric alternative or possible reconciliation, a lucky way out, has only been left with the possibility to continuously warn of the fatal effects of the coupling of media and politics. On the other hand, the utopian point of view relies on the previous experience that every crisis can create an opportunity. The first utopian step would be to relax the panicking mood, claiming that we have little of our own to offer for the time being, apart from the extraordinarily developed crisis semantics, which is often not trained on the current situation, but rather derived from crisis comparisons. Freedom is born and reborn in the face of constraints, and it resists only surrounded by challenges. In the context of panic, we only search for a security, and we no longer seek to see how much security is incompatible with our freedom. Utopian messages in the time when the whole society is transforming itself into a giant hospital would be eager to provoke the counter-transformation from the egoistic self-centered standpoint into devotion to the others, from the pointless passive ignorance to the possibility of fighting for the otherness of itself, to becoming a better and more just community. And at the same time, that would mean a redefinition of freedom. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor PROLE, for your overall view to the problems arised by this situation and commenting also in different directions. If you allow me to fix some things, which is, I think, not a judgment from my side, but as a former politician, I have some special feelings in this direction. First of all, in this context, and here we are moving to the first panel concerning expected and unexpected paradigm changes in the fields of politics, economy, education, healthcare, and ecology. And this is a long list of subjects we have. But it is a question. We are still sticking to the system of the nation state in Europe and in general. But I think having the European Union and the move more coming together, how much is it moving the current nation state in the right direction? Because now we know that we can only prevent some things, and getting mutual assistance on all the research done on vaccine, but also providing the protection clauses and so on and so on. Here we can see where are the limits and where have we to close down or to shut down borders which we have still together. First point. The second point, you mentioned the expression war, and I think in the context of Macron, I think, okay, war, but isn't it this situation concerning health and social situation also a challenge for empathy? I think always to make wars is really horrible. We had enough wars in the future. I think here we need to turn around. Third point from my side, it is always mentioned we need a liberation. But the liberation for what? To get rid of, for sure, that's a kind of liberation. But liberation is also an important tendency in which direction to move. For what are we now free after this liberation here? And also, I want to mention two expressions which you have used. The one is alienation. I think here we are learning that we are very much depending, comparatively very primitive, to meet each other. I think here we are learning that the other has a crucial importance of our relations, to contact him. It is not only the other to create borders and to be on distance, which is also one of the rules we have, but also we have the desire, again, to come closer and closer to more understanding. Therefore, I think this question of alienation is also interesting. The last one is a word which we are very much using, and having a terrorist attack here in Vienna, we are looking to security. But I think we have to discuss what means security. When are we really secure? Are we secure if we are protected, if we have borders, if we are not close to other if we are distance, or is a kind of security also necessary in having closer contacts to create a kind of common security, a general security, which for sure is necessary. So I think I mentioned some expressions, and I'm extremely happy that we have an outstanding panel of those who are sharing our concern on this subject concerning the paradigm changes I have already mentioned. A warm welcome to the Rector of the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, Professor Diplom-Ingenieur Dr. Hubert HASENAUER, for those who are close to the Austrian language, Universität für Bodenkultur. I'm warm welcoming him also as a Vice President of the Institute. Also a warm welcome to Professor Zdravko, KAČIČ, Rector of the University of Maribor, Dobar dan, here.
Dobar dan.
Also Professor Dr. Martin SELMAYR, who is a representative of the European Commission in Austria, and which I may say quite positively, always taking part in all this discussion, really, that we can have the feeling the European Union is not something outside of us. We are in midst, and the representatives are in midst of us. A warm welcome, Martin SELMAYR. And
thanks for inviting me.
Last but not least, Julia Winkler. She is Staff Secretary on the EU Agenda for Health Across, Public Health Agency of the country of Lower Austria. Beg your pardon. She's in charge of the Department of Healthcare, which I think is one of the great challenges. I think we are now concentrating even more as we have ever done on healthcare questions. So far, I presented to you, and may I propose that Rector HASENAUER is taking as a first the floor?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, dear colleagues and friends of the IDM. Thank you also to Professor PROLE for this really excellent introduction speech. It's really a pity that we do not meet in person, but nevertheless, I think your speech was very motivating and made it very clear why this institution is necessary. From my side, the statement would be as follows. Coming from the ecological side, I thought you could look at the COVID-19 crisis like we sometimes do in ecology. If we have a disturbance, and I think a pandemic event as we experience it right now is something like an unexpected disturbance event. Such disturbance event, at least in ecology, and I guess you can also see this in societies, may lead to a certain tipping point. And tipping points are often seen as something where you never really know in which direction the societal development will go in the future. And I think, at least from my background, also as a forester and an ecologist, I would really like to see that we overcome this pandemic, but also to learn our lessons in terms of don't make the same mistakes again. So making our society more sustainable, being much more careful in these ideas of that only economic development drives the society. I think we need to think or learn here, or should act in a much broader sense. Considering also that if we rebuild our economy, we should rebuild it with technologies which help us to pave the road for a sustainable future. And a good example, and I would like to end with this, is that in all this economic development, we should integrate the ecological costs in the GDP, because this would be a fair assessment between economic growth and, let's say, the costs or the damage we might do to the environment. Because resources are limited and we cannot expand our planet. And I think Europe, and especially also the region here in Central Eastern Europe, could be a role model for such a development. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Rector, for your comment. I think it's quite interesting that you are coming from the ecological side. I think it is a real answer to the question, is it a war against the virus? But the virus is a part of the ecology. I think it is amidst. So far, I think we need to have another understanding what nature means in general. But this is a general comment. I'm asking now Director of the University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the invitation and this fruitful discussion. I would like first to say that my perception of the current crisis is the perception that when the question of responsibility should be addressed and maybe in more, I would say, critical way. That means responsibility of the individual to the society and responsibility of the society to individual. And this means for all generations. And we are now facing the problems where some, when the younger people actually have ideas that the older should be removed from the society for a month or two, that the young people could live normal life, what was actually pointed out by your Prime Minister. And this I think, shows in a way how, in what I would say, mental state the current society as such is. And I would very much agree with Professor HASENAUER discussion about the problems of today's crisis. But on the other hand, I think that the COVID crisis is undoubtedly one of the most challenging periods in the development of the modern world in the last few decades. More than ever before, it has become clear that only with knowledge we can overcome the crisis and avoid the worst consequences of the pandemic as we know it from history. In addition to the major negative impacts on human life and the economy that the COVID-19 epidemic will surely have in both the short and long term, it is important to see the opportunities that are opening up and are mostly important for the post-COVID-19 period. It is therefore essential to try to make the best out of the worst. Two areas that I would like to mention and that have quite clearly emerged as significant short as well as long-term opportunities are digitalization and distance learning. Digitalization is the overall challenge for all of us in order to tackle mostly the following societal challenges: active aging. Digitalization and automatization enable a longer active work life, higher productivity or competitiveness. Digitalization enables higher quality of assurance, speeding up the production processes and less cost-demanding production. Knowledge transfer. Without digitalization, it is hard to store and make information available to a broader public. So important steps were made in these areas in the time of the COVID-19 crisis and should be maintained and further developed after it. E-learning and distance learning and teaching are not new items in the world of education, but COVID-19 makes the advantages visible and obvious. It was actually a test, I could say a worst-case test, of our readiness for the future development in this field, especially the test of digital infrastructure and a big push for new technologies in the field of digital multimedia and multimodal communication. The practice of e-learning will remain in our consciences, especially in lifelong learning and in all cases where groups of stakeholders have difficulties in accessing knowledge and resources. For example, less advantaged people, less mobile people, limited resources can be used more rationally, as we learned now. Several issues were opened during the crisis that need to be reconsidered or need a change in our perception and understanding. One of them is virtual mobility of students and teachers. However, the crisis also raised the awareness of the drawbacks of e-learning, distance learning in the education system, and the importance of the sociological aspect of the education process. It is also recognized that with today's technological solutions, distance education cannot yet replace classroom education. An important area that also emerged as an opportunity during the crisis is the green economy and bioeconomy. The Green Deal, where especially the Danube region has experience in green economy and bioeconomy. It is our competitive economic advantage for a long term already, but COVID-19 showed the effects of lockdown to nature and ecology in a very short time. The lessons learned with regards to a home office, CO2 balance improvement, the importance of hygiene in general, all that should be remembered also after COVID-19. The next disease will come as unexpectedly as COVID-19 did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director KAČIČ. I think especially for lining out where we can get a kick forward by the situation as a positive reaction to improve the situation. So far, many thanks that you have mentioned it. Now the floor is up to Professor Dr. Martin SELMAYR. Thank you very much for the European view.
Thank you very much, President Busek, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to see you all, at least on the screen. It will be no surprise to you that I don't have a dystopian view of the future, but also not a utopian one, but probably an optimistic one. I believe we Europeans spend far too much time in enjoying dystopian visions, self-flagellation, and seeing every challenge as an existential crisis. This is a particular European nature of our character. I think it's good and healthy to be self-critical, but sometimes we have also to see what is positive also in a crisis. I have therefore 4 statements which I would like to throw into the discussion. My first thesis is to say that in spite of the terrible nature of the crisis that we're witnessing at the moment, I would say that I see no other place in the world where I would like to live during this crisis than in Europe, and of course in Austria and in Vienna, because we are in a democracy here and we are living in a decentralized system. And I think that has for us as human beings huge advantages. The biggest advantage is that governments have every day to struggle between how much freedoms do they continue to grant us and how many restrictions do they do, and they have to balance freedoms and restrictions every day anew. This takes time, but I think that for human beings is a good thing. It's good that we have this balancing act every day, that the principle of proportionality is applied, and that as a result of that we have as many freedoms as possible and only as many limitations as strictly necessary for reasons of public health. This is sometimes painful to watch and leads to controversy and arguments, but I think the overall balance of this is better than a centralized decision in the dictatorship. That is my first thesis. The second one is that as the European Union is based on the principle of democracy, on 27 democracies, and is a decentralized and not a centralized system, as you, Chairman Busek, have reminded us at the beginning, I believe it's also very much a learning system. Yes, we all make mistakes, so we make mistakes together, but we are also able to correct them together after discussion, deliberation, controversy, and then compromise. Just to mention 3 examples. Yes, it is true, as you mentioned, that in the first weeks of the crisis in March, borders were closed. And of course, as a European, I don't like to see borders closed, even though it is legitimate and even legal in a public health crisis also to resort to this instrument when there are public health concerns and in a stage where most governments in the world didn't know a lot about this virus. So it was a legal and legitimate safety measures. But very quickly we saw also the damage that this does to human interaction, to the economy, because we are interconnected in Europe, not only inside the European Union, also with our neighbors in the Western Balkans. And therefore, what we learn from that now in this second part of the crisis, we're not closing the borders. The borders are open. The borders are open. Of course, traveling is restricted by public health recommendations, but we're in a totally different situation in the second phase of the crisis than in the first. And I think we saw how closely interconnected we are and what it means to close the borders. We have had a country like Slovakia that had almost no victims of the public health crisis in the first wave, but lost 10% of GDP in the first months because it is so closely interconnected with the rest of the world. And that has taught us a lesson that in the second half of the crisis, we don't close the borders, even though we limit travel. The second lesson that we have learned is on the financial side. You all will remember how in the financial crisis, it took us 3-4 years until we as European Union together acted, whether it was the European Central Bank or the European Stability Mechanism that we set up to stabilize the economy and the financial system. This was reckless. It led to a situation where some countries in Europe, which are among the richest in the world, had a sovereign rating that was below Vietnam or some African countries, which was totally disproportionate just because people doubted us and we doubted ourselves. Financial markets work by algorithms who search the internet for words like crisis, default, catastrophe, and these words were so abundant in Europe at the time that we got a disproportionate negative rating. And I think in this second phase, in this crisis now, in the Corona crisis, it took a couple of weeks, but after 5 weeks, we had a safety net for our companies, for our workers, and for states in the European Union of 540 billion euro that immediately calmed the markets. The European Central Bank intervened within hours after the declaration of a pandemic by the World Health Organization. And in July, we agreed on a 750 billion recovery fund for the European Union. That, by the way, also helps our neighbors that are in the direct vicinity of the European Union. And yesterday night, we agreed on the budgetary basis for that. So Europe is much faster than the last crisis, much faster. That it takes a bit of time is natural because we have different views, but at the end, we compromise and we come together. And the last lesson that we have learned is, I think, on the health front itself, where we had most to learn. You, President Buzek, and others reminded us that, of course, in the European Union, as it is set up, public health is not a central European competence. I personally believe this is a good thing because public health matters are, in most cases, best decided locally in a decentralized way, in a differentiated way. But there are issues, as we saw, we need cross-border coordination. And even though there is no European competence, European nations agreed over the last weeks on remarkable innovations. For example, there is now a joint procurement scheme for health safety products like masks and ventilators that existed only on paper before. And in this first phase of the crisis, it wasn't effective because member states didn't contribute. Now, in the second phase of the crisis, we are able, as European Union, to purchase jointly masks, ventilator, and other health products, and also to share them with our neighbors. I'm very happy that also the Western Balkan countries participate in this joint procurement scheme, which is a first in the European Union. We also have, and that you have read this in the press, we have a joint procurement of vaccines. There's not only one vaccine. We are at the moment in negotiation with at least 10 different vaccine producers. But we have all understood, even the biggest countries in the European Union, that we are too weak on the global markets if we do this everybody for ourselves. And we are also weak if our neighbors suffer while we have a vaccine. Therefore, we have decided, even though health is not a European Union competence, that all 27 nations empower the European Commission to jointly make contracts with vaccine producers. And just yesterday, we concluded another successful contract with the producer of the first, as it appears to be a successful vaccine. We will purchase 300 million doses. Every country in the European Union will get its shares in terms of population. So Austria will get 2% of that. That will mean that by next summer, 50% of the Austrian population could be vaccinated and could receive this vaccine under a contract that is concluded by the European Commission for all 27 nations. Something unthinkable. I remember when this was first proposed in the SARS crisis 10 years ago, all countries of the European Union were against giving this power to the European Commission, including Austria. Now in this crisis, it is different. We are always learning in crises, and I think that is a good thing. My third thesis is that the global environment is, of course, lightening up, and that is positive. It should not be underestimated. It should also not be overestimated. Yes, it will have good impact on the Paris Agreement, trade, the Iran Agreement, the Middle East. But I think even more important, it will civilize the tone of public discourse. Because let's not forget, the damage done by Trumpism over the last 4 years was not so much on the actions. It was more the tone and the style. It was the first tweeter in the White House was the role model of every populist around the world. And that was a big challenge for everybody who want to manage crises or have a civilized discussion about the big issues of our time, including Corona. Yes, it matters if the first man of the world says it is good to inject bleaching instruments against Corona, or that you shouldn't wear masks, or if you do it differently. I think this is the biggest change. Everything else, I would warn us Europeans to overestimate that. And my concluding remark is, and I think Professor KAČIČ said that, that I indeed see this crisis, as many crises, as a tipping point because the European Union learns as a learning system from such crises. I would say in the past months, the European Union has made more steps toward working in practice as a true federation in key areas than through 10 treaty changes. Because, just to mention again 3 examples, the European Commission is now issuing bonds for 27 member states to rebuild Europe after the crisis. The European Commission, secondly, is purchasing on behalf of 27 nations vaccines for a whole continent, and I believe these vaccines will be successful. And thirdly, in spite of the fact that we are in the middle of such a crisis, we have not only focused on ourselves, on our own problem, but stayed open to the world, worked together with the rest of the world, activated the United Nations system, the World Health Organization, continued the enlargement process. We all spoke about the big crisis last year when the enlargement of the European Union to North Macedonia and Albania was blocked. And in the middle of this crisis in April and May, we overcame this and decided as European Union that the Western Balkans belong to the European Union, even though it will take time. And then enlargement negotiations should be opened this year also with Macedonia, with North Macedonia and Albania. And we even followed up with action during the crisis that Bulgaria and Croatia were included in the ERM2 system, our exchange rate mechanism that links them to the euro. That happened in July, and both countries joined the banking union, therefore will be much closer to the center of stability in the European Union. So we have not forgotten our neighbors, and they will also participate in the purchases of the vaccine. They will benefit from that because the European Union will become stronger in key areas, but also wants to remain open for the world. Therefore, to conclude, I think there is a reason always to be self-critical, to learn from past mistakes, but also not to be dystopian. Let's watch less dystopian Hollywood movies, and let's not forget to sometimes also dream about the future, and notably to roll up our sleeves and to work for a better future. I think our continent has the strength and the potential and the capacity to do that. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Many thanks to Professor SELMAYR. I think he lined out, as he's always doing, in a very straight way, that the European process is learning by doing, to realize the things here, which was outlined very good. And I think it is quite better that you have been focusing not on the question of competencies and so on, which is sometimes in the past the European discussion, but the challenge that we have to react and we have to manage the problems and we have to bring forward the European cooperation. Many thanks for lining out this, and hopefully a lot have listened. Last but not least, I think that's not very nice that the lady is the last one, but it's coming out of your role concerning regional responsibility. I'm giving the floor to Julia Winkler, I think, here to speak about the possibility of regional activities. A warm welcome, Julia. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning also from my side, and thank you for the warm introduction, Dr. Busek. I'm working for the Health Across Initiative. We are part of the Lower Austrian Health Agency, and we're operating and managing all the 27 hospitals of Lower Austria, as well as now 50 nursing homes. Our department, we're responsible for all international and European activities in the field of health of Lower Austria, with a special focus on cross-border healthcare. What do we mean by cross-border healthcare? Well, we work every day to ensure equal access for all our citizens living in the border regions to access high-quality healthcare, and thereby improving their health and well-being, while at the same time reducing health inequalities. Why is it important to look at cross-border regions? Also in this crisis, well, in fact, more than a third of the European citizens live in border regions, and these are a lot of persons. And I'm very glad that also Dr. EICHTINGER in his introduction speech mentioned this, because we believe that regional cooperation is in these times more important than ever. And as cross-border cooperation already implies, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacts for us, for our daily work, but especially for the citizens living here. And I'd like to contribute 3 statements to our discussion. The first of all is that cross-border cooperation will be or is beneficial for the current situation, because especially in the first lockdown, when there were rules put in place by national governments, it was basically our regions who had to deal with them, and it was our regions we had to see, okay, these and these problems pop up in the border regions, and we had to solve them. And it was quite impressive to see that next to the corporations, the physical corporations, they couldn't take place any longer, but it was still possible because we knew the other side of the border, we knew the authorities, the politicians knew each other. It was possible to have and remain and even intensify the dialogue between the regions. Second of all, what we see is definitely that digital transformation takes place. Beforehand, there were a lot of discussions, is it possible in healthcare to bring in digital technology, to use it? Is it possible regarding all the laws that are in place? But basically from one day to another during this COVID pandemic, it was possible to have online consultation with the doctors. It was possible to have e-prescriptions, which is very, very positive in the whole field of healthcare. Also, we have a project going on between Lower Austria and Hungary, which did not have to stop because we are building up the cooperation in digital pathology. Hungary is quite advanced in digital pathology, and we're learning from them, and it did not stop only because there was this COVID crisis. And last but not least, I'd like to say that what we see in this pandemic, we're right now trying to manage or control the disease. We're trying to keep the infections down, and we will try to be able to treat the patients. But afterwards, after that, we have to see that we build strong and resilient healthcare systems, that we have healthy people, which will be more, which are more likely to stay healthy. And how is this possible? Well, we have to fight health inequalities, because what we see in this epidemic is that those people most vulnerable are often most hit by the pandemic. These are the elderly, these are people with preconditions, these are people working at the front line, often commonly poorly paid. So we have to see that everyone in our society, we take everyone and bring everyone to a better level of health. And therefore, I really want to say that we have to give priority in fighting health inequalities for the future in the healthcare, and that we maybe try to find a multi-level integrated approach among several areas that we have an answer to this pandemic. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Julia Winkler, especially. I think if I want to pick out one of your arguments, I think the social aspects which you have mentioned, I think are extremely important because this is a side which has some importance, because I think in all this discussion we can hear the social aspects, even reaching from the poor and their ability to manage the situation until the feeling of loneliness, socialization, that enough staff is existing, and so on and so on. It's of extreme importance. My friends, I have to say many thanks to you. I want to mention that we have now 40 minutes for discussion between us here for additional remarks, maybe some critics, or maybe also to mention priorities, because we are in limits with our possibilities. I want to line out, listening to you especially, I think you're focusing on the technical developments and the possibilities of connection by modern technology was lined out very much. Professor KAČIČ did it in a very impressive way. That's only to mention one first view, but I think the quality of our participants is that you are also able to take every idea possible. Whom can I give as a first the floor? Please assign. Rector HASENAUER, thanks.
If you don't mind, I start. Thanks to the comments also. I think I I really would like to go back to this statement I did with this tipping point. And Professor SELMAYR pointed this out very nicely. A crisis is, I approach it from an ecological perspective, because in ecology we are used to these crises, so external disturbances. Societies are often thinking too short terms. So then they forget how this usually works. At least this is my impression. So you might disagree. But in principle, every disturbance may lead or creates a bit of a chaotic system. And it's very important that we derive the correct lessons, as you pointed it out very nicely. And I think if you see this as a chance, then at the end, it has a positive impact on the development of our society. And it's very important that we, at least from my perspective, that we look at this from a conceptual point. There is often this saying, we are afraid of the unknown. And then often you are afraid of things which you know. But the real danger to a system are things which you don't know. So we always have to live with a certain, let's say, risk, which is unpredictable. And I think this pandemic, the COVID-19, was something like this. Nobody thought about this. We thought about a lot of other things, but certainly not a health problem which didn't exist so far. And you see then very nicely how a system reacts. And I think you pointed it out very well. And this is what I meant with this tipping point. The tipping point is really in which direction we go. We can go in the wrong direction, or we can go in a so-called correct direction. And what you pointed out is really very important and optimistic for the society, that we say, okay, we have a plan, we want to change it, but we might also take different ways in doing it. And I think this is really the strength of the European Union and also the democracy, as you pointed out, because it takes a bit longer, but you really get this brain power to make a better world. And this is what my beliefs is, or my hope in the European Union, that we draw we go in this direction, because the COVID-19 crisis will be over sooner or less. I mean, we can't get rid of it, so we have to deal with it. But the question is, how do we do this? So in a way, I'm really very optimistic that we are strong enough in Europe to find a good solution, but not just for the crisis as such, more the societal development in a broader sense.
Thank you very much, Rector, for your comment. May I say I'm a fan of your idea, because personally I'm always convinced that chaos is a precondition for creativity. If everything is planned, there is no creativity. It's not possible to plan everything. We can be happy, but this is extremely important. I think here I have to use the German language. I'm a fan of neugierig. The Latin language is here better. Cupitus rerum novarum. Eager to get knowledge about new things. Cupitus rerum novarum is extremely important. And the chaos is a challenge to go in this direction. Just a comment, but Professor SELMAYR was asking for the floor. Please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Busek, and thank you, Professor HASENAUER. I fully share your assessment about the tipping points and the way how you describe that. Before we get too much carried away with optimism, let me add one word of caution. That nevertheless, yesterday alone in Austria, 45 people died with COVID. Therefore, it is not only a good crisis. It's first of all a terrible crisis. And what we have to do now is to draw the right lessons from this crisis. What I think is important to underline, what is exactly the tipping point? The tipping point is not that people didn't know that such a pandemic could arise. There, I would like to compliment what Professor HASENAUER said. Every expert, also international and European institutions, knew that pandemics are a real threat in our modern society because the world is interconnected. And we had several times over the last 10 years moments which were very close to a situation as we had now. We had, for example, as I mentioned already, the very deadly SARS virus in the year 2009, and then we had the H1N1 virus, what was called here the swine flu. I remember very well to have been called at the time. I was in Brussels working in the Commission in a senior position, and I was called into our crisis center and our crisis people had there a map how this infection of H1N1 could in very few days lead to the total disruption of public life in Europe. And so the scenario that was described there was indeed very terrible. The experts said that is one possible answer. They proposed the joint procurement of masks and of vaccines because at the time everybody did what they wanted in their own corner. There was a kind of vaccine nationalism even in countries. And surprisingly, a couple of weeks later, the vaccine was so quickly and effective and it could be contained the infection that this pandemic didn't spread so far that it became a collective memory as COVID-19 now is. But we were very close to that. All the instruments were tested and experts always said at the time, this is something, it's a matter of a couple of years. This will, at some point, we will not be able to contain it. So I think the tipping point is now that we all have this collective experience because in Asia, people had this experience already. In South Korea, for example, people reacted now much faster because they had this collective experience. Therefore, what I think is important that not only, and that's the tipping point, that not only the experts know about that, but that public policy at large, that also not only health experts, that also finance ministers, ministers of the economy, ministers of infrastructure know about this, that society at large knows what the rules of the game to contain infections are, the normal hygienic measures that we are all now used to. I don't think they will completely go away. Wearing of masks in Asia is absolutely normal. I think it will stay also relatively common in Europe, even though not so widespread for cultural reasons. Therefore, I think the real difference is that there is now a collective experience and that this collective experience will make sure that what experts so far knew will also lead to more broader public responses. And that will make our societies, economies, and as Mrs. Winkler has said, also our action at local and regional level more resilient for our health systems, because we have already one of the best health systems in the world in Europe, or several very good health systems. But there were always discussions, should we reduce our investment in the health system? No, I think we have done well to invest in this health system and should continue to do that. And we may also share it more across borders, as Lower Austria is doing this in an exemplary fashion with its neighbors in the Czech Republic and in other parts of the world. So I think that's the lesson, resilience in a non-expert way that we all understand that, share that, and invest in that also with public policy.
Thank you very much. Who wants to be the next? Professor PROLE, are you satisfied with our reactions?
Yes, of course. We mentioned several typical points, but what I would like to add is to a little more comment on my thesis about lethargy. I'm not that enthusiastic in terms of distance learning, because I've noticed that in a certain age, which means until the age of the faculty, I would prohibit the distance learning, because the kids need to hang out with their own generations. They become lethargic. My own son become lethargic, which means a lack of motives. I see lethargic atmosphere as a first step to depression, and facing we only via artificial media sources with the education system, they are lacking what is most important. That's their own generation, their own comparison models, their own source of motivation. And that's why I don't think that distance learning is to be a genuine solution for the future, especially concerning the younger ages. Speaking of my students, I would say that they are better via artificial world, because they are involved into discussions much more than we are together alive, which is quite difficult to explain, but it can be connected with self-limitations, some inner blockades they expressed when we are all together at the faculty, via internet, they are more open, and that's really important to notice. But related to younger generation, I can express my anxiety in terms of the question whether we are capable of making an autist generation. They are much more connected with their gadgets. I can mention the thing I heard yesterday. One girl, 9 years old, said to her mother, "I swear to my telephone." In that measure, gadgets are, let's say, compensating the lack of human being around us. That's the thing I think we missed in our conversation. How the education via artificial media they used to experience as non-reality, or the entrance into the other world, other reality, how is to be effective. I'm not very optimistic in that way.
Thank you very much for this very important statement. I think it is also challenging because it's quite clear that using the technology, which we are doing now here, I think cannot be a substitute for personal contacts. This without any doubt. I think I'm on board of some advisory boards, of curatoriums, and so on and so on. I think what I'm really missing is the straight personal impression of actions and reactions. I think to see you here, it's very nice, but you're getting a more exact feeling what the other is thinking if you have be in front of him. I think the personal contact cannot be substituted. That's for sure quite clear. But we say, not in contrary, but in addition, I think we have to learn to be with these instruments. Personally, I'm a visiting professor at the University of Graz, and I'm doing there some lessons on this way. But it is not the same as you are sitting in front of your students. You can see their reactions, they are raising questions, and so on and so on. Because not only the personal behavior of one, but also the collective behavior, the reaction on comments is of extreme importance. I think that's great importance. So far, a warning to all ministers of education and science. I think this way cannot be the only way of teaching. That's my personal conviction, but I have to confess I'm an oldie. Maybe I'm not really trained to such things. Any reactions to this and others? Professor KAČIČ, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, I am grateful to Professor PROLE that he pointed out to this aspect I just briefly mentioned in my discussion. Yes, I would completely agree, and I think that it is our common belief that current situation is not very positive towards making steps in improving the quality of education. I must personally say that I am suffering giving the lectures in this way, especially from the aspects that you mentioned. There is no interaction. There is actually also no interaction between students. You cannot actually create such atmosphere that it usually can be that can develop in the teaching class. Therefore, I think that we all agree that when this situation will be overcome, we will return to the so-called classical or for some old-fashioned way, but this old-fashioned way proved to be effective, proved to guarantee students to gain the necessary knowledge, necessary expertise. And I think that at least for my lifetime, these things will probably not change in much in this direction. However, what we experience and learn now is that, on the other hand, we can use this experience in enriching our way of teaching by, for example, based on the experience and based on the acceptance of this way of communication, we can invite different experts to actually join the class and to maybe from United States, Germany, Austria, actually address some specific issues, some specific problems. And I think this is something that we can use out of it as a small part. And also we see this experience as a good experience and a positive experience in lifelong learning. I think this is something that has potential, but in this classical way, especially on primary and secondary education, I am sure that this is not the way we should see for future development of education. And I would really like to thank very much to Professor SELMAYR for his very inspiring and positive discussion, the first and the second one, because I think that such a positive energy is more than needed. And I also very much agree that behavior matters, the patterns matters, and the messages matters, especially from the people who are seen, who are followed. We know now the social media with millions of followers of particular celebrities. I never understood why this is so important, but it obviously is. And their influence is very, very important. I think that the last elections also in the United States also showed this potential, which can very easily be misused. Therefore, I emphasized in my discussion at the beginning that the responsibility of individual and the responsibility of the society, individual to the society and society to the individual is very much important. And it actually is shown its importance in the current situation. I would agree that Europe in this crisis indeed succeeded to use the crisis as an opportunity in many respects and made steps that otherwise would probably not be possible for years. We have similar experience at our university, of course, in a much smaller scale, but we did some major steps in some areas, especially digitalization, which would not be possible without the situation. And what I think is possible, is important this way, is that people actually recognize the current situation and the need for such steps as the only possible to overcome the situation and accept things that would otherwise would be not possible. Currently, we have a big debate about electronic elections. Is this the same? Can we actually assure the same security, the same quality as it is in ordinary or usual elections? So there are several issues that are popping up, and we are addressing them. And not all, but several of them we can see as opportunity in the crisis time to make a significant step forward. But of course, I completely agree that in making the steps, we have to be very cautious and we have to be very responsible. Because when we make the steps backward is usually much more difficult with consequences that nobody of us would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rector KAČIČ. I think this was a very important statement. I think being for a longer time in politics, I remember as internet and then social media started, everybody declared to me, this will be the perfect situation for democracy because we can make decisions all linked by this technology and so on and so on. And I think it's coming clearer out that's not the case. I think there's nothing instead of a real personal contact, besides the fact that social media are also misused for a lot of aggressiveness, which is not so easy if you have a personal contact. You cannot be aggressive in personal contact in such a way as it is done now by social media. We have to use it. I think we have to learn on the subject. For my feeling, we are in the beginning. But this was a very important statement, not only concerning learning on distance and so on, but also in the social behavior and the social contexts. The floor is open. Who is the next? Professor SELMAYR, please.
I only intervened because I thought that the point that Professor PROLE made is very, very important about what this crisis means for teaching. And I'm speaking here also more as a teacher myself at the University of Vienna and Krems. I share 100% the frustration that was voiced by you, but also by Professor KAČIČ and others about the current situation that we cannot interact directly with the students. And that we have a different way of working. And like Chairman Busek said, is of course nothing replaces personal and social contact. On the other side, and there's always something good and something bad in such a situation. Who would have thought that President Busek and us would be on a video conference together a year ago? I don't think President Busek, you would have thought that. I would not have thought that. We all have made, I think, a quantum leap in using digital technologies, and that applies to teachers. The younger generation is, of course, much more able. They don't have the same problems that perhaps the older generation has. And therefore, I think we are all learning from that. So I see in this also an opportunity, not that it replaces personal contact, but that it complements it. And for the reasons that Professor HASENAUER has meant about our responsibility for the climate crisis, I think it's good that sometimes in the future, when this crisis is behind us, and let's be clear, it will take, unfortunately, at least a year until we will be able to say that, we will be familiar with new tools. And we will also have given an incentive to all the users and to develop these users further. I have the same experience as Professor KAČIČ. It is very tiring to teach in the way it's like talking into your iPad, and that is not very stimulating. I think it is this can be very frustrating. On the other side, we are also finding out that you can, and we are talking with companies about this, there are SMEs developing new products, that it is possible also in virtual form to make a conversation and even a negotiation or teaching much more interactive. So the traditional lecture in front of a classroom is, of course, very tiring and probably was not ideal in any event from a pedagogic point of view. But now we can have an incentive to develop technologies in a different way. I came across by looking for companies that develop new products for teaching, and I find out there are some companies in Europe, they're now developing virtual reality classrooms. So virtual reality classroom where I have the possibility to have an experience. I need to have glasses or a screen in front of my head to be able to do that. But if people have that, then you have an almost real experience. And many use this in international negotiation when you have no time to travel. Therefore, these technologies, I think, will make a quantum leap. I go back to what President Busek said, nothing will replace personal contact, but there will be sometimes moments also for international relations where it will be very useful that we don't have to cross continents, but that we have to get together much more quickly. And also for conferences of the IDM, Professor Busek, you will get much more interesting speakers from other parts of the world than if you only sit together. The only thing that we cannot yet replace is the nice glass of wine in the evening. And I think we have to work on that this will be also possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially for the glass of wine you mentioned. I think here we have to invent a lot that it is really possible, because this is also a part of mutual information. If you are discussing with a glass of wine in your hand with the others, because some things are easier said, for sure. It is especially Central European, but I would say I don't want to blame other parts of the world. They have also their own way to come closer together in such a way. But besides this friendly remark on socialization, I think as the oldest here on this panel, I'm moving out a little bit out of moderation being in charge of the fact that I'm nearly 80 years old. I think what we will get is a real problem with the overage society, which has a lot of difficulties to join this situation. I think to learn it de facto, how it is really functioning and so on and so on. I think to give you a very primitive example, for sure I have to go to my branch of the banking association where I am, and now in the past we had a nice contact with the lady being in charge of your konto and so on and so on. Now you have a lot of machines in front of you, and what I'm always experience is there are a lot of elderly people staying desperately in front of these machines and asking me, they may know me from TV or whatever, you can tell me what I shall do. I shall push some buttons, I don't know which buttons, and so on and so on. There's even more primitive the technique we are using now. But this is also a kind of alienation, which you should not underestimate. I think here I'm making a vote for the elder generation, because also I was really fed up that for a longer time we were described in this corona situation as the endangered generation, the marginalized. I think we have the right to die earlier or whatever, which is, I think is not a beautiful perspective. I think we have also to look to this because of the other side, the elder generation in our Europe has some importance. I'm always telling the facts that I remember that my parents have paid their parents because the generation of my grandparents went to two world wars and they lost nearly everything. And so far it was a responsibility of my parents to pay for them. Now, if I'm looking around, now the grandparents are paying for the grandchildren because the grandchildren have not enough money really to handle the things or wanting a more luxury life or something like that. We are getting also by this a conflict of generation. And this I want to mention, it should not be a conflict. I think we need a certain relation to manage it. Just a vote for elderly people. Thank you very much for understanding. Which of your youngsters want to take the floor? Nobody? That cannot be true. Oh,
I guess the youngest is Mrs. Winkler. Huh? You.
Yes, indeed I am. And I have to actually take into responsibility my generation, also in the situation we are right now, because obviously it seems that we were the ones partying and spreading the virus more than any other group. But we all have to come, you know, in the end of the day, we have to live this concept of solidarity because we're all in this together. Health is a very tricky thing because you can try everything to stay healthy as long as possible and live healthy lives, but there will always be externalities like the environment or like people smoking or people not getting vaccinated who basically endanger you. So I hope in the end we will all get a bit more a sense of our people right and living right to the left and the right to us, and I think that will be very important.
Thank you very much. Also mentioning solidarity, I think that in general that there is no feeling that I'm too critical on behalf of the elder generation. I may say, as far as I experienced it and getting also messages and comments from others, oldies, they are telling me that the solidarity is existing in Austria, especially Vienna and Lower Austria. That's the regions where I'm really moving so far, but we have to continue. I think now we have a feeling of an extraordinary situation, but some of these developments will be ordinary, will be in general and not an exception, and that will be also very interesting. Beg your pardon for commenting, so and many thanks for your comment as coming from the younger generation. Who else wants the floor?
May I comment on this? Oh, sorry.
Now, Professor HASENAUER, and afterwards, Director KAČIČ. Okay.
I mean, more from the experience in working with young people, and we have to run a university with a lot of young people, and pretend that everything runs smooth, or at least try that everything runs smooth. And it's pretty interesting if you discuss with young people how they perceive this COVID-19 crisis. What we saw after that, the first lockdown was, of course, for all a shock. But then during the summer, they were really eager to meet in person and have more or less a regular semester. And you could really see how people, also young people, wanted to meet and have this group experience that also President Busek pointed out. And it's also from a medical point of view, from neural network research, we know that the verbal communication is processed much slower than this non-verbal communication. So in a way, if you communicate only through internet and so on, you will never be able to process so much information if you meet in person. This is scientifically proven. So you cannot replace this. This is impossible by definition. And what my experience is from the youngsters, of course, they take advantage in classrooms or technical sessions of the distance learning. But when it really goes down to something like this experience of a university, then the distance learning is only a tool, but we will never replace this. Because we all can watch YouTube videos and so on. Why don't we do this? Because we don't like this. We want to meet in person. We want to have this group experience. Of course, we also want to have this glass of wine, but in this glass of wine is much more. It also transports information. And I'm really looking forward when the time is coming that we as a university can really go back to the classrooms. We might have some system of a hybrid or something like this. But I think the young generation is really appreciating the opportunity in meeting in person, also getting professors face-to-face in teaching them. And they also appreciate this much more than they did it before. And in this sense, I think we as a society are still in the process of learning, or at least experience what should we learn from this crisis. And I'm not so pessimistic about the youngsters. They really like this, to meet in person, even if they are very familiar with the technology.
Many thanks, Director HASENAUER, for this optimistic perspective. I think to meet in person, I think, is a very important thing, because then we might appreciate more the individuality of the other person whom we are meeting. That's, I think, quite interesting. Professor KAČIČ.
Yes, thank you. I very much agree with Professor HASENAUER. I must say that I enjoy very much my work at the university, because I actually don't get older. The students are always the same. My children left home, so I have no evidence that I'm getting older. But of course, I know that I'm getting older. And I would also agree that the younger generation developed their own way of interaction, of solidarity, combining much more than we did in our young days, the modern technology. But of course, although they are maybe in the school very much use their mobile phones, and in the breaks they are not interacting, they are not discussing, but typing SMS. They need and they are very much in need of such socialization. What is actually also for them, the crisis today, very much an experience in this respect, that I'm sure that when they will be back in schools, they will behave, at least for some time, differently as they have before. And I would like to address also what you said, Professor Busek, the problem of older generation and the new technology. Yes, I completely agree. The digital divide is at the moment very much present, and the older generation are not familiar with all the technology that is surrounding them, especially when they have to do things connected with their daily living. And many times this has to deal with the banks. And as we know, the banks are very keen in following the new development. I just heard, for example, that Deutsche Bank has fired more than 200 analysts. That means highly qualified employees, because they replaced them with the artificial intelligence technology in trading. So these things happen, but I am optimistic in this from the aspect that the technology is developing in a way to actually be less and less technological. So that means it will be it will offer some services in the same way as it was before made by human. And at the moment, I would say more or less we are in some transitional period where this unfortunately is yet not possible. Maybe just one final thoughts. I also see the problem which was exposed in the current situation and was not maybe so much obvious before, that modern society actually stimulates individualism of persons. So you are as a person important. It is not the society that's important. Your needs are on first place. And after that, if you need, there is a society mentioned. If you don't need the society, who cares the society? And this is very much, I would say, an aspect that we have to address in the future. And universities, I think, has an important role in this to not only educate students about with the knowledge they actually came for, but also to somehow raise the awareness of importance of responsible behavior to their classmates and also to the society as such. And in this regard, of course, also to the older generations. Thank you.
Many thanks, Professor KAČIČ, for mentioning the importance of the human being, of the individual. I think a general view, I think I can only meet human beings. I cannot meet the society. The society is in a certain way a reality, but it is a part of the reality. And the human beings building up a society are each one of a great importance. That's my conviction. We are coming closer to an end. We have some minutes left. May I ask whom I give the floor? If not, then you are doing, Professor PROLE, what I wanted. You have the last word. Please be so kind.
Thank you, Professor Busek. Just one concluding remark. What I have personally learned, thanks to coronavirus crisis, is that the others are the source of our personal motives. Losing the connections with others, we are staying without any motive whatsoever, and that's an important lesson as far as I can see, to really to become aware of the fact that our careers and our living goals are not to be taken for granted, but they were created by our friends, our compatriots, and our surroundings. That's what I want to add. Just
thank you very much for your comment. Is anybody who wants to gain the floor? No, then I'm closing. I have to say many thanks to all of you. I think it was quite a good entertainment, may I really say, about importance. What is important and what we have to focus, including all personal experiences. I have to say many thanks and have to announce that we have 10 minutes break. And afterwards, we are getting the second panel, possible challenges and chances for youth, culture, media, and civil society. The moderator will be my old friend Nenad ŠEBEK here. and the other participants will be presented by him. Again, many thanks, and may I say, I hope to meet you in person for this glass of wine. The glass of wine will be my job. You are invited. Thank you very much.
Stay healthy. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's second panel with the title Possible Challenges and Chances for Youth, Culture, Media and Civil Society. That's quite a tall order for the 70 minutes that we have at our disposal, but let's try and do our best to help us try to find the answers. We have on our panel today Daniela INGRUBER from the Research Lab Democracy and Society in Transition of the Danube University Krems, Hedwig Morvai, Director Strategy in Europe, Erste Foundation Vienna, Professor Adrian Guta, Art Historian Curator from the National University of Arts in Bucharest, and Fatos Mustafa, Deputy Secretary General of the Regional Youth Cooperation Office, RICO. Having lived with the pandemic for 9 months now, the panelists agreed that we are all quite familiar with the challenges and therefore agreed to focus on the word chances, on what is it that can be done. During the first panel, in his contribution, Mr. SELMAYR gave us an excellent overview of the positive things that have happened and an optimistic view in terms of pointing towards what is it that we have done right in this crisis so far, and emphasizing the advantages of working together. And I must say that although the overall theme is utopia or dystopia, as an optimist myself, I was very pleasantly surprised to hear not a utopian, but an optimistic overview during the first panel, and I hope that we can look at the opportunities and the chances and do the same in the second panel. The panelists have agreed to be crisp and to the point, starting with the opening statements, which they have agreed to squeeze into just a couple of minutes so that we can have more discussion time. Questions from the floor will be taken about halfway through the panel, so please use the chat function to do that. Let's hit the road running, as they say. Daniela INGRUBER, you have the first word.
Thank you very much for the invitation. So far, it has been really, really inspiring. And I'm especially happy to have heard so many optimistic views on freedom and also on the very difficult topic of fear that a lot of people now have. And this really leads me into my topic, the media. So I would like to add a few details on the situation of the media and the media users, because both are having a hard time during this ongoing crisis. And you will see I'm actually mixing challenges and chances because I think they really belong to each other. And by the way, I think that the situation in the Danube region is not very different from the one in other parts of Europe or also on a global level. So while the population has fallen into a certain fatigue and struggles with the harsh measures that had to be taken, the media seem to be caught up in their own fight or in their own struggle because they have to find their own new role. During the springtime, the media mostly had to serve as a megaphone of the government, which, as I suppose, was a good thing because it was necessary to bring down the difficult orders and the measures to a wording that everybody could understand. The consequence, though, was at the same time that those who were being skeptical did not receive any space to be heard and turned to the social media, where they found a wonderland of opportunities to spread fake news, disinformation, and so on. I'm not going into that because we all know the rest. But there is more to that, and I think here we can already look into the chances, because during the last months, the media have been in a sort of panic mode, and I really see them slowly coming out of that. There's still too much work for two tiny media teams. We all know that the media teams, the editorial boards, have gotten smaller over the last years because of financial issues, so they are more or less too small for all the work they have to do right now. There is too little information, and especially too little trustworthy information. And of course, there is a decline in advertising that robs the media of their financial income. And here again, there is a chance we can support the media by giving them information, by supporting them also from a research level, supporting them with valuable information.
Also subscriptions, financial help as well.
Yes, actually, a lot of media have already started doing their own sponsoring or getting sponsorships, getting voluntary voluntary fees by their readers. But there are two things that seem very important to me, and is that several governments, and here I have to mention Hungary and Romania, used to struggle against fake news for political censorship. And this shows us very clear that if we want to help the media, we also need the willingness of the government to protect the freedom of expression. And finally, and I think this is really dangerous, the media see themselves today confronted with more and more violence by the population. And if you read the statistics and certain reports of the last few weeks, you will see that there is more going on. So that means communication is key here, because rumors and disinformation do not act in a vacuum. They are based on a feeling that something is wrong with the mainstream opinion. People feel that they are alone, and this is where the social media have outdone the classic media. So they take the citizens by their emotions and fears, and this we can do. So we don't have to leave that to any trolls. Here we can work on that. We can comfort the people. We can give the population an impression of community also through the media and the social media, and we can provide the people with a truth that they do not only want, but that they psychologically also need to hear. So looking at the emotions and trying to support the people will be very, very important, because one thing, the population is not stupid and it is not unwilling to see the facts, but many people are afraid. They see their freedom taken away. And for many months now, they have been treated like small children, and that has been going on for far too long. So we can also change that. The only thing that we can't do, we cannot promise the population that it will be over soon. And today we already heard that it might take 1 year, and that is a really, really hard time.
Or more even. I would, the one thing that you said, but we'll come back to that later, is sort of relying on the government sort of to protect the freedom of speech and freedom of the media. Relying on the governments is never, in this particular case, doesn't really work all that well. Thank you very much, Daniela. Adrian, you're next with your opening statement, and you're going to take us into a completely different angle of discussion, and I'm very happy because of that. Please go ahead.
Indeed. Thank you, Nenad. Thank you, Sylvia, for inviting me. I would have liked to be in this conference on the spot and in Krems, but unfortunately, it's like that. It's online. Well, indeed, I'm from a totally different field. I'm from the visual arts. I'm professor at the Art University in Bucharest. I'm teaching contemporary art history, both Romanian and international. And I'm very glad to see behind you, and behind me is also a library, because the library is the main thing to talk about in my contribution. Well, if you don't mind, I'll read my introductory because I do have to control my time and my emotions in the same time. Well, my contribution pleads for the importance of the books, of written culture and of art for our present and future. This is, from my point of view, one of the most important chances we have. To sustain this idea, I start from a certain field of artistic creation, namely the object books, books made by artists, in the work of two important authors, the German Anselm Kiefer, born in 1945, and the Romanian Ion Bițan, who lived between 1924 and 1997. Besides making object books, they developed this idea into that of the library as art objects in itself. They became real sculptures. Anselm Kiefer once said, the book, the idea of a book, or the image of the book, is a symbol of learning, of transmitting knowledge. Kiefer uses lead in his work, and this is connected with the alchemical quality of this metal. Instead, Bițan's piece, the library, is made of wood, with important names inscribed on the elements of the library. An aspect to be underlined is that during the communist regime, books, reading, were essential means of spiritual survival in Romania. They were an essential chance for our inside liberty, our liberty of mind. Now, at the end of my introduction, it comes to my mind a comparison with George Orwell's novel 1984, in which the importance of books was remarkable too. They were danger for the regime. They were surprised by people to be shared with the others afterward as a chance for the spiritual survival. Orwell's dystopia is to be found quite astonishingly in Romania's reality during the communist regime, mostly in the Stalinist times and during the Ceausescu's second period of domination, which was officially named the Golden Era. This is my first intervention.
Thank you very much, Adrian. The Golden Era seems to be quite popular for the last couple of years. The Serbian leadership has been talking about the golden era in Serbia, not necessarily that the citizens are aware of that. But then there's always a parallel universe between the political elite and the genuine citizens. Hedvig Morvaj is next. Hedvig, you wanted to talk again a little bit more about the common home and about the interdependence. That's something we heard a lot about during the first panel. It'll be interesting to see in which direction you will take it.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, even though I really hope that this conference will be possible to be organized in person. I do share the views with the first panel where it was raised how important still it is with all the possibilities we have developed and used to in this digital sphere. It's very important that we kind of appreciate and maintain our social context and direct context, and that we learn from these experiences now and we learn to appreciate when we are able for a direct exchange. I think, you know, this is one of the uncomfortable truths, what we learned, and there are many more. This pandemic kind of contributed to learn and to realize in what kind of a world we live. And if we now focus on our region, on this part of Europe, it is important that we are able now to realize that we cannot maintain with eventual pleasant fictions and delusions. And you know, Nenad, that I was talking a lot and advocating for not continuing the business as usual approach, especially when it comes to the European future of the Western Balkans, for example. Well, I think that now we have a great opportunity and chance actually to stop, because we have to. It's not because we want or because we know in what direction things should develop, but we must. So many things are changing that we are getting the opportunity now to develop new ideas. And this is especially important for Europe. Europe must become fit for this next period. We also learned a lot about interdependence, and we, again, as this conference focuses on this specific region, we have to mention that the corona pandemic showed the interdependence between the EU and the Western Balkans, and this opened new opportunities. It creates a kind of an astonishing amount of space for rethinking the European project. It also showed that geography matters, and possibly now kind of a regional approach will be more important than anything else. What seemed impossible until recent times is now possible. Let's just think about European policies. which have been developed. So to develop a solid foundation for a prosperous future, we must think about developing new instruments. Oh, sorry.
That's your cell phone. That's okay. We understand that.
Yes, that was my timer because now it's over. But with what I want to finish is that we must develop new instruments. And because I want to focus on civil society and its role and look into chances which possibly lie there, there must be new instruments for empowering people, and these must be backed by smart policies. And then I do believe that we will be able to create a Europe which can maintain all its achievements and what supports then a caring society, what is very important at this moment.
Thank you very much, Hedvig. A small remark, technical remark. In case you have a set of headphones, maybe you could use them, or maybe bring the laptop a little bit closer to yourself, because the microphone you sound a little bit faint. So whilst we listen to Fatos, if you can possibly sort out that technical problem. So we've got the media, we've got art, we now have the civil society, and I guess we are turning now towards the youth. Fatos Mustafa, the Deputy Secretary General of the Regional Youth Cooperation. Where are we? How is the youth cooperation going ahead?
Thank you very much, Nenad. So first of all, please allow me to really congratulate you on, I would say, like on so far for almost a year now, being on the very first let's say very forward-looking activity, where like usually up to now we are more focused on like what are the challenges that we are facing and trying to somehow like cope with the situation, but very rarely and even when tackling, quite partially talking about the opportunities and also the forward-looking over the situation. So and what I really like is also like how we can turn this into looking from challenges and turning them into opportunities. So when it comes to youth, of course, it is absolutely tackled or let's say like impacted the overall since we deal with the reconciliation process, and meaning that like we somehow our core activity is meeting people, young people together, but still this doesn't mean that we've stopped working in regional cooperation and so on. Hedvig has very rightly somehow mentioned this interdependent, and this, let's say, situation showed very much how important is like this interdependency of like not only the region itself, but also the European. It was also like a bell for the European Union. So how much
it was a common thread. It was also a common thread during the whole of the first panel.
Exactly. So then, like, it's really like very much important, like that this is taken as such and understood as such, that it's like really a kind of like a joint approach is necessary, and it is the only option actually to tackle such difficulties. But in the other side, young people usually somehow have also like blame of like having these like limited opportunities from the old generations. Please don't get me wrong with this, but like this is some kind of like permanent or constant kind of like fight between the generations. So out of like these, let's say like now digital era, if I can call it, start of digital era, where the pandemic somehow pushed us, it's somehow put young people into an advantage of the momentum, of somehow like bringing into like kind of like taking over some of the processes and leading in some processes, maybe not in the top high level, but still having more say on the overall how the future should be shaped. And another thing is like, you know that in the Western Balkan region, there are a lot of difficulties when it comes to the cross-border. But when these new, let's say like circumstances, there is also an advantage of like being able to cross border without any limit, by just like being in front of your laptop, being in front of your cell phone, and you cross border and you can cope and cooperate and work with your peers across the border without any limitation.
But without a glass of wine, as we know well.
And then I will come back to two of like potential, and then also like the new forms of cooperation, which is also like somehow the humanity and especially the region and Europe somehow got the comfort zone of like having the same approach of while working, while like the human approach is necessarily like also like to have like a permanent or constant improvements. And in this regard, it was also like kind of like a teaser of looking forward the new opportunities, the new forms of working, which will very much reshape the overall circumstances even after the pandemic will get over. Maybe
that might be maybe a good thing to discuss, these new forms and new shapes. Maybe that's something that we can bring up later on in the discussion. I'd like to hear about them. I'd like to go now to Adrian. Arts, I must say, I haven't been to a concert since March. I haven't been to an exhibition since March. I haven't been to theater in March. And theater, exhibitions, and concerts are a very, very important part of my life, and I miss them. Maybe I was being too cautious, too scared of the virus or whatever. The only thing which has stayed with me and which is one of my strong passions is the book, on which you decided to focus on. So is the book, I mean, we can hear concerts online, we can go to opera online. The Vienna Philharmonic has opened up its website to broadcasts of concerts from times gone by. But the book is the only thing which I can have in real time, and I can physically hold it in my hand and feel it. Is the book our solace in this moment, Adrian?
What? I didn't hear you well. The last words.
Is the book the one thing that we can rely on, our comfort, since the other forms of art are actually missing from our life? You focused on the book, that's why I'm...
Yes. That's what I'm doing all the time at home. I have to stay at home to do online classes, but the book, of course, lecturing in the book is the most important thing I can do now. And look at the exhibitions that still are opened online, but the book, the art book, literature is the most important thing to keep us alive now, I think.
So what opportunities, what chances do we have in that field, in the field of arts? We can look at the books, which we know can be our comfort, no matter how strong the virus or the pandemic is. What about the other shapes and forms of arts and culture? What opportunities are there apart from online?
Well, not much. I remember quite recently I was in an exhibition because it was open after the most critical period, and I was very much enchanted to meet the artist and other artists, and I discovered again that being alive in an exhibition is the most important thing, because it's not the same to look at an exhibition online and to look at the walls with works or in space.
Daniela, you spoke about the media and how they have exploded in this time of the pandemic. You know, we rely on them to give us information, but you also pointed out to the dangers that exist there. I personally don't like the word fake news, because something is either news or if it's a lie. It can't be news and fake, but there is a lot of that. There is a lot of disinformation, and especially on the social networks, which many see as a great opportunity and as a great chance, but also as a great threat. So where exactly do you see the opportunities and the chances in the media field in the forthcoming still pandemic and post-pandemic era?
I think that one of the good things that I saw in all of that situation is that we finally seem to understand that education for the media is really, really important. We use the media, we share videos, I mean, everybody can create a video, everybody can create a meme and so on. But finally, to see that we need some background information also on the consequences and what it can do to other people or what it can do to ourselves. This is something that I see, especially when I work with young people, that there is more consciousness about there, and also a willingness to get more background information instead of only using the technological part of the media. So this is something that I see is important, and maybe something that that is a little bit into the direction that Adrian also talked about, is I really believe in the importance of public spaces. And for example, you were talking about exhibitions. I think that exhibitions in public spaces are really, really important now. And the same can happen, of course, on a digital base, that the media can create open spaces and public spaces where the people can come together and see that it's not only about power games, that it's not only about
but there's a lot of especially in reactions, once we create an agora, a public space in the media, which is usually underneath the news item, you can leave comments. A lot of those comments actually we see, for me, an amazing amount of hate speech. We see an amazing amount of negative reactions. So the public space can be a double-edged sword.
It can, but actually I was not talking about comments. I see that comments on the media are a really difficult topic. But so many art projects have started to get people together to work together on a book, on a piece of art, on a painting, and so on. And there, this feeling of a community, and I'm sorry that I'm coming back to community and inclusion all the time, but I think this is what keeps us alive in these times. You can create that because we don't only have Zoom, there are so many more possibilities today for coming together on a digital base. And if we teach the people how to use those tools, then also a lot of community things can happen on a media perspective.
We're talking about media literacy here as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I have been working for film festivals for many years, and also for many years we have tried to bring media literacy to a topic at school, and it is very, very hard to bring that into schools, but somehow we finally managed to sneak it in, and I can see that this is very, very helpful. And of course we can also create possibilities not only for pupils or students, but also for so-called grown-ups to get more civic education in the form of media literacy.
Which south of Austria in the rest of the Danube region is exceptionally low, by the way. Is media literacy, Fatos, something that is a part of the work of RICO? Is that something where you see the need for the young people to get engaged more, to learn more about a critical approach towards sources of information and so-called sources of information?
Thank you very much, Nenad, for bringing like really something that it's also like that it was like well kind of like estimated as an issue that we have to tackle with when it comes to the young people. Indeed, we have already, let's say, like had a joint initiative together with the Deutsche Welle of like having like starting with the young journalists in order like to somehow well channelize on the right direction of the information flow of, let's say, like the developments that are mostly on the regional and European level that somehow includes the Western Balkans, starting from the Berlin process itself and the European integration process and so on and so forth, which usually sometimes or sometimes is very much, let's say, kind of, let's say, directed on the way from that somehow is bringing into the our, let's say, TVs and radios more the narratives on the way that, you know, like usually like either like certain politicians wants to see than like really the real information to be there. And then and especially in these given circumstances with, you know, like limited access of, you know, like physical exchange, it's not easy to really like to identify which is like really the right source to depend on. And with this also, we are trying to tackle this with we are now on the process of designing the new communication strategy, where we are trying to work, first of all, with at least 6 public broadcasters in the region, and as well with various, you know, like journalists, in order like to somehow have the group of journalists who will be very much focused on having, like, to say, like the proper information over the developments in the region. So that's
well, good luck with the public broadcasters, because to the best of my knowledge, and I'm a journalist for quite a number of decades now, the public broadcasters in the WB6 are not really what public broadcasters should be. They're more instruments of the respective governments than they are what a public broadcaster genuinely be, if we have in mind, for example, you know, the first of the public broadcasters, the British Broadcasting Corporation, or the Austrian radio and television, etc., etc. Hedvig, can the civil society in some way bring all these threads together? The media, the youth, the arts?
Well, I think what we could observe during this month is that civil society actors are rising to the pandemic's challenge in many different ways. So civil society again proved its ability, flexibility, capacities. What we saw in many different crises already, especially in the region of the Western Balkans, where civil society was rising high during the wars in the 90s, had a very interesting development path, and which also managed to kind of take active part in policy processes. Fatos mentioned the Berlin process. That is one of the political environments where civil society managed to act as partners to the participating government. So I do think that here we do have new opportunities for civil society. And as I said, I also like the fact now that that there is some disruption, there must be change, because the tendencies which we could observe previously when it comes to shrinking space for civil society, very complicated political situations in many of the countries which are hampering the work and the existence of the civil society itself. The development in the field of foundations in the philanthropic field, where we saw how difficult it is for many categories of civil society actors to kind of maintain the so-called sustainability or simply the pure existence. I think that now, because also the philanthropic world has to redefine its way of looking at the future and operating in the future, and there are already many processes taking place, there is a hope that also civil society will be supported and treated in a way to get a new opportunity for exactly tackling all the issues which are necessary and to be part of the post-pandemic recovery process, also focusing on the issues what were mentioned here, and kind of react as a hub and the platform which can then move forward in all these directions.
Well, the Berlin process has been mentioned a couple of times, and actually a few days ago we had the latest round of the Berlin process, which happened in Sofia under the joint chairmanship of North Macedonia and Bulgaria, and there was a lot of talk about a number of issues: connectivity, coming together, working together, progress to the region, etc., etc. Was there enough attention paid to the civil society, in your opinion?
Here I have very mixed feelings, and let's just say about the Berlin process, I think that this situation now is the perfect moment also to change the approach of the Berlin process. What we have in the region is a very vibrant and highly developed platform for regional cooperation. And I think that there is now the moment to rationalize this regional cooperation. And in partnership with the EU, in order to make Europe fit as a whole, the region should take a completely different role. And now there would be the opportunity to take those parts of the Berlin process, those projects, those initiatives, those ideas, which are the most vital, which are the most probable to be successful in this new context, and which could actually contribute to developments which are important for Europe as a whole. And let's just focus here maybe.
Can you number them? Can you tell us exactly which ones would those be?
Well, you know, it should be about supporting talents. It should be about innovation. It should be about recognizing the existing human capital in this part of Europe, and to go back of utilizing this existing human capital. And there, because you asked about civil society, I think here civil society can be crucial. civil society can take the role to move these processes forward and to insist also in the context of the Berlin process to focus on this. And there the region could eventually become a very constructive part of the EU in rebuilding this project for this new future.
Adrian, I did not hear I did not follow the whole duration, but I did not, during this Berlin Process Summit, I did not hear the words arts and culture, at least not in any kind of a context which could promise some kind of an investment, not necessarily a financial investment, but a time investment, a political investment into that. Are you optimistic, however, that arts and culture can find their own way in this, not just within the Berlin process, but that they can fight for their own position in these pandemic and post-pandemic times, which hopefully will come in the not too distant future? You're muted, Adrian. If you can just unmute your microphone, please. It's the little button microphone icon in the left-hand corner of the screen.
Now we hear you.
Yes, now we can.
Okay. Yes, I think also that post-pandemic times will be better times for receiving art and for making art in the studios and in open air, in the public spaces. But I wanted to add something, if I may, about the profile, the artistic profile of Ion Bițan, the Romanian artists of the two that I talked about. If I may. Yeah, I knew him. Ion Bițan was a designer, but he was formed as a painter. He was professor at the Arts Academy in Bucharest, and I knew him personally in 1997 when I was one of the 3 Romanian curators for the Venice Biennale, for the Romanian participation in the Venice Biennale. And so I knew him from the phase of preparing the works in the studio to transporting them to Venice, afterwards to Venice. And so we had a lot of discussions, and I liked him as a man, not only as an artist. I mean, he was a very warm and good man, with his students too. And there in the Venice Biennale, in the Romanian pavilion, I also met in the contribution of Ion Bițan, Pierre Estany. And Pierre Estany is one of the most important art critics, a French one, in the 60s, 70s. And afterwards, unfortunately, in late September, I think Ion Bițan died. But his memory is still vivid, both for the art critics, the artists, and the students.
Thank you. Can I take you back to the question? Thank you very much for sort of completing the picture which you showed us with the illustrations which you gave us. But can I just ask you for a view towards the future? Can arts and culture find its own way? You know, people are obsessed with health. The media is obsessed with its own issues. The youth have their own agenda. How important are arts and culture going to be in our lives? I can't imagine life without them, but is that the future as well?
Me either. I think to say everything in a single word, that arts are still healing us, stirring our souls and our spirit. And this healing condition and quality is still very important. And talking about healing in connection with visual arts, I remember of Joseph Beuys, the well-known German artist, who stressed upon this quality of the art as healing, as a healing measure.
I couldn't agree more with that. Daniela, the media can have a healing element to them, but very often they have the exact opposite. What can we do about that?
Yeah, I don't really agree to that opinion that I can see a lot, that the media are only full of hatred and that they give us, or that they prevent us from getting real information. I think that especially good journalists, and there are many more good journalists than we might know, who are really researching and really trying to communicate with the people by using a certain kind of language that is very, very cautious. They can be healing as well. So especially, for example, during the last days in Vienna after that horrible attack, I could see so many journalists working on a very, very cautious level and trying to heal as well the situation after the attacks, but also the fears and the emotions that the people have in this pandemic. So I think maybe that's also something where I can refer to Mr. Busek, who said it's not really society, but it's always human beings. And also the media actually are human beings. So they have the same emotions, the same fears. They can also get sick. They dedicate their lives to giving us information. And I think we can also acknowledge that. So I would also turn it around a little bit. We need to help the journalists to heal the media situation.
How much is it up to the journalists? How much is it up to those who control the media, to either media owners, whether they're private individuals, whether they're state-run media, or international conglomerates as well?
I'm very happy that there are certain NGOs that try to protect journalists, but regarding the owners of the media, I sometimes would agree to what you said before when I talked about the fact that we need the governments also to work with us on the freedom of expression. I think that it is very, very hard to rely on owners who have certain interests. So it is more, I think, a deal between the journalists and the people. And I think there is some power in the population to work on that.
Maybe I'm being a little bit pessimistic because I live in the lower Danube region, which is where, as I said, the public broadcasters are not really doing what the public broadcasters should be doing, but they're basically instruments of the ruling elites, and that's it. There is no sort of genuine implementation of the concept of public journalism. The same goes for a number of private media, who, for primarily financial reasons, tow along the government's line, 100%. There is very little critical journalism in Serbia, in Bosnia, in Northern Macedonia has become better, actually. Mm-hmm. What else can we, what can we do about this? As I said, relying on the governments is not really going to, really work unless you have a genuine democratic society, which we don't have.
Exactly, I absolutely agree. I do believe, though, in media education, also for journalists. I can give you a very tiny example, but in February, before the pandemic was overwhelming, I was working in Iraq with journalists to work on the freedom of expression. And it was really interesting to see how the professors that I taught, or who I taught, were very, very much into that and wanted to share their knowledge now with the students. And I have seen that in Hungary, in small elements, but I think this is something that can work. So let's not give up the journalists in the South, because also there, I think, if we can strengthen them politically a little bit, and also by strengthening them from the point of from media to media, we can do a lot. This has also worked on film issues. If I think of the scene in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and so on, some people from Vienna could help, and the other way around. So I think working together, cooperating on a media level will help.
Thank you very much. We've got 30 minutes left for our panel. Can I also ask the audience if they've got any questions? They can ask them on in the chat function, and then the organizers will pass that on to our chat here on Zoom. Hedvig, the civil society has always worked pretty closely with the media, not just to popularize its own activities, but also a number of civil society organizations have been involved in protecting the media freedoms, as Daniela has pointed out. What would you say, let us try and sort of focus our discussion now for the 27 minutes that we have left. Where would you see the focus of activity of the civil society in the forthcoming year, in the forthcoming period?
Well, I mentioned that it should, the approach to post-pandemic recovery should not be the business as usual, because that will not be possible. But I think that in many areas, we have to go back to the basics. And that is about building societies based on democracy and values, which are so important for us in Europe especially, and principles and public debate. So, you know, this is where civil society must become very active, and this is where civil society has to fight for its space. And this is where civil society, especially in these challenging times where there is no real freedom of movement, where autocratic tendencies are kind of really present in many European countries, and there are now also new mechanisms which are even helping these tendencies, thanks to the fact that for fighting the pandemics, there are now opportunities for governments to eventually also misuse some of the powers they have for the sake of health and security. So these are very challenging times for civil society, but especially in these times, those genuine parts of civil society, which were always committed to these principles and building democracy, really have to go back maybe to some of the basic approaches on how to foster democracy and a value-based society in Europe as a whole.
And has the civil society in the Danube region risen to these challenges over the past 7-8 months that we've lived with the pandemic?
You know, it's a very when we say civil society, it's already a very broad term, and if we say the Danube region, it's a very it varies. You know, the path of development of this sector in all these countries is very, or at least in some of the regions, is very different. However, what I already mentioned in my previous address, I think that civil society demonstrated its capacities in so many ways. And one of the qualities of civil society is that it's rebuilding itself. It's able to refresh itself, and it's very flexible. So I do think that it can find a way. You know, it's still this world, at least in this part of the world, in this region, it's not such a dangerous situation that civil society would not have the space and the opportunities also to adapt to these challenges and really to take the role which it has to play.
Thank you. Fatos, Hedvig's mentioned values a number of times now. The young generation is often accused of lacking those values, especially by the older generation, i.e. by Adrian, myself. Is that really the case? Or do the young people have a different set of values which maybe we do not understand?
Maybe I think also like a matter of like what do we consider as a value? It's a matter of perspective. So let's maybe sometimes like what has been considered on the old generation as a value not necessarily is kind of like sounding as a value to the new generations. But Nenad, I mean, let's be frank with the overall situation. So how many of our young people are really traveling across the Western Balkans, since now we are focusing on the Western Balkans? I do remember back in 2016, end of 2016, I read in one of the EU info centers in Niš, it was by then, where around 80% of young people never traveled out of the country. So that's really, I mean, I took as an example of that I know the data that I read, but I think the quite similar situation is not only in Niš and Serbia, but it's all around across the Western Balkans. And the second, let's say, of not downgrading, but maybe the question mark is, even when they're traveling, the tendency is to travel in the Western Europe. So that's, again, there is the interest of traveling is quite discouraged, mostly also by the economic reasons, barrier reasons, and so on. So how we can now really think of what is the value of young people when it comes to, let's say, in the overall of their life. Therefore, like all generations, at least for some time, had some other opportunities, which differ quite a lot today's opportunities that young people are having. Therefore, also the values and how we value those values, also it differs across the generations for the very basic, let's say, reasons.
You're absolutely right. When I was young, I mean, we had the opportunities to travel. There were financial means to travel. We could get jobs as young people, as students. We could have sort of sideline jobs, and that has not been the case. And indeed, one of the reasons that RICO was formed was actually to enable the young people from the Western Balkans to get to know one another, to mix, to mingle, to exchange values, to exchange arts and culture, to create their own joint media. How successful has RICO been in that?
Actually, I mean, within the at least last 3 years, because we have 3 years and a half being operational. I mean, it's not only that like it's a self-assessment, but also like it's well assessed also from and recognized from our partners, including also the European Commission and also our governments, as many things have been developed and done within the time. Despite that, many also like difficulties and challenges have been on the way to that. So parallel to the consolidation of the institution itself, also like very much focusing on the overall objective of RICO, let's say, existence. I mean, we are to deal with the reconciliation process of the young, at least on focusing on the young people, which, I mean, the results of such a process takes really time to see them and impact them. Let's just take as an analogy with the Franco-German Youth Office, which was established over half a century, and still they are having a lot of, like thousands of young people exchanging, meaning that it is an endless process of reconciling societies, especially our societies were like,
the progress is rather slow.
It is rather slow. Also, sorry, Adrian. Just for one more reason, that like it's a bit differs from the reconciliation process of what the Franco-German Youth Office did, is the fact that still in our, let's say, politicians, the narratives are very much different what used to be the narratives of Germans, let's say German and French leaders back in 50s, 60s and 70s.
60s when it was formed.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I have interrupted, but I wanted to add something about this relationship between generations, because I'm a professor at the University of Fine Arts in Bucharest, so I have a permanent relationship with students, with younger generations, and I'm trying to be in tune with them, and it seems I do succeed in this, and I very much enjoy.
So what's your secret? What's your secret?
I don't know. I can communicate with younger people, with students, and I think the other way around is also valuable.
I'm very happy to hear that. And so how do you achieve that? I mean, what is your secret?
Well, maybe one of the most important secrets is that I'm talking about contemporary art, and contemporary art is one of the hottest fields in all the art history, and of course they are very much interested in the present. I couldn't say future of the arts because no one can say something about this, but in the present of the arts, yes, and I'm in tune with them, and the other way around is also valuable, as I said.
And maybe it's also because you're probably, I haven't attended your lectures, but I'm presuming that you're using a two-way process, because one of the things that has always been a challenge in the communication between the younger and the older generation has been that the older generation tends to preach and not necessarily to listen. Are you a good listener, Adrian? Is that the secret?
I do hope so, and I think they can confirm, the students, I mean.
Thank you. Daniela, can the media sort of help bridge this generational gap, which has always existed throughout the history of the human race? It has always existed, but maybe today it exists even more so, surprisingly.
I'm so happy that you brought up listening, Nenad, because I think that active listening is one of the most important tools for a journalist. And here, journalists really can create bridges, yes.
And the civil society, a bridge maker? Hedvig? You're muted.
Well, yes, that's a natural that's the natural role of civil society, I think, also in this area. But I wanted to comment on what Fatos was saying and on this issue about how the young generation thinks and about reconciliation and to what level we manage to advance cooperation and communication among youth when it comes to the Western Balkans. I think, you know, that now this is an opportunity also to, this pandemic, as we said, is an opportunity to maybe cut with some old practices, but also an opportunity to really look into the future, because we have to be very much concentrated on how we shape some crucial policies in the future. And I think this could be also a chance for the young generation in the Western Balkans to finally start using their capacities, their energy into building something new and something different, and apply some different practices. That I think that the young generation in the Western Balkans is very much burdened with the past. And of course, it's very important to kind of be comfortable with the past and learn how to deal with that. But there is now the opportunity to do something different. And I think it's also, I mean, as I said already, the philanthropic field is redefining itself, trying to find new practices. I think it's also a new moment to maybe for RICO to kind of think about new practices, how to channel this energy of the youth in the region in some other way and in some other direction. And definitely here civil society and all the initiatives, what also RICO is supporting, what comes from the civil society can be a bridging support in this.
Fato, is RICO listening to the civil society? And not just listening, hearing. Let's not forget, listening is one thing, hearing is another.
Indeed, I mean, very good point. Like both, I mean, listening, not only listening just like as an echo on the ear, but also as a real like understanding the needs. I mean, in all of our not only documents, but also like driving mode of RICO has been very much depending on hearing the civil society organizations. Of course, very much focused on the youth needs, because that's what is our, let's say, our main focus. In the same time, what we are also like, let's say, very much kind of like working with is also the schools, on the secondary schools, where we want to somehow tackle these kind of issues on very early ages, and working together not only with the kids but also with the professors. I very much agree with Adrian that not all of the people, and sorry, maybe I was not clear with not generalizing. So it's not a matter of generalizing, but it's a phenomenon of like a clash of generations. And what we tend to work is also with the teachers in order like to have a kind of like a sustainable process of reconciling the societies. Maybe who knows, tomorrow in the future we might also like kind of like find a way of approaching to the parents to have a comprehensive 360 degrees of kind of like approach on the reconciliation process, because young people themselves can somehow have a good hints of by meeting together with, let's say, across the border peers, but then when they go back home, they somehow go back into the reality of how the surrounding is impacted. Exactly, they go back on their islands of how the mindset is set up for decades and centuries sometimes.
One of the questions that we got from our virtual floor is, should media education be introduced in schools to soften the aggressive attitude that some social media users have? We spoke already about media literacy. Daniela, should media literacy and media education become compulsory?
That would be my total dream. Yes, I think we really also need that for the future, especially when it comes to aggressions and so on. And so far this has been quite difficult, but I have to report about the really nice project that the Danube University has together with the government of Lower Austria. It is called Science Academy, and their teenagers can do some extracurricular work, and we also have a field for media and politics, and it is fantastic to see how open-minded they are and how they only in those first few months that we have been working with them already have changed their attitudes towards the media and their media usage. So I think if we have school subjects like media literacy, then we can really build on that in the future.
Is media literacy anywhere in the focus of RICO's work?
I told, yeah, I'm hearing that. So I told you, like, we are now working on designing our approach also when it comes to the communication on at least on two directions. How RICO is like itself as an institution, but in the same time how to work in the context of how to kind of like educate, if I can say so, youth in this. But in the same time, our, let's say, grant is, since RICO is a granting.
I don't know if it's just me, but I have the sound frozen from Fatos. Everybody else as well? Okay. Fatos, let's hope that you'll be able to rejoin us. We've got only 10 minutes left for our discussion. So just one final question from me, and then please feel free to sort of round up whatever you feel that you want to add to the discussion that we've had. And thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. Question for a very brief answer by all of you is the direction you would like to take if there were no limits, if all the possibilities were there. And let's start with Daniela.
That sounds wonderful, not to have any limits. Well, first of all, I would really invest a lot into civic education and media literacy. Because I think what we can learn from this pandemic is that even in Europe, we cannot take democracy for granted. We cannot take the freedom of expression for granted. And both of them can only exist if we keep on living it by ourselves. So if we as human beings invest in living it and changing it to our needs. And during the last years, I have been doing a lot of interviews with people about media and democracy, and you wouldn't believe how more open-minded the human beings in our area actually are. And I hope we can keep that up by giving them good media reports in the future and a lot of education.
Hedvig?
Thank you.
Hedvig, directions for the future?
Well, I think it would be very important that both governments and societies learn from this situation and use all the existing instruments and possibly develop new for really entering into a dialogue. And then the other actors like civil society, media, support this real dialogue. We see only in communicating the pandemics, the situation, the measures, appealing on the citizens to kind of comply with the rules, etc., etc. So much depends on trust and on understanding. And some governments are more successful, some are less successful. It's a global challenge now, and we can very easily compare situation in different countries. And citizens can compare situation in different countries. Citizens are now judging their governments by comparing their actions to other politicians and other governments in other countries. So it's really a great possibility to possibly correct some of the biases which we have, some of the wrong developments. What we can observe in some of the countries, maybe in a very simple way, using a window of opportunity and applying the right tools and being active and taking control for the future with a different perspective.
Historia magistra vitae est. Unfortunately, the human race has not really shown in practice that it actually does learn from past experiences, but maybe that will change. Maybe that's one of the things that the pandemic will change. Adrian, what is it that... Fatos has rejoined us. Welcome back, Fatos. Sorry, we lost you right in the middle of where you were explaining about media literacy and the attitude of RICO. You're still not fully connected. Let's hope that will happen. Adrian, we've got very little time. What was it, and I'm sure there are lots of things that I didn't ask you and that you didn't have a chance to say. What would you like to say to round off your participation in this panel?
Well, I want to say that I want to be back in the amphitheater with the students live, because the whole discussion can resume to two things, to a polarity between natural and artificial. Now we are in the artificial era. I want to come back to the natural one.
Yes, an artificial or a virtual era, which is not the same. I'll go back again to the glass of wine that Dr. Busek offered earlier on and hope that we can have it sooner rather than later. Fatos, welcome back. Very briefly now, because we've got very little time, what is it that you would like to add to the discussion that you haven't had the time to say yet? Fatos, can you unmute yourself?
That's right. Actually, I was almost to close it, but then like just I did.
We hear you now.
It seems I have poor connection because now I'm connected with the 4G. Yeah, sorry, but electricity was gone, and so you see, like this classical stuff still impacts, and now connected to the 4G. Actually, I was closing, like, let's say my previous one, but then like we can continue, and then just let us know. Like
well, we're continuing now. We're live on air, Fatos, and
yes.
You've got about a minute and a half to sort of round off and say something that you wanted to say today, but didn't have the time to say it yet.
Okay. So just like maybe just a kind of like a message to the young people, like be patient, but that does not mean that you have to be calm in terms of like being passive. You have to be like really hyperactive in what you do and what you really would like to do, not only on your ghetto, on your like very small group, or start from your community, but then like continue in the overall, in the region and the European level. That's what I would really send a strong message to the young people.
Thank you very much. Daniela, same question for you. What was it that you didn't have a chance to say yet?
Well, I think in my last statement, I already rounded up more or less, but I think what I would like to add is, because you asked us once about who could be our allies in
yes.
this, and I think that the population is our civil society is our ally for the media.
Okay, Adrian, who's your main ally in your desire to reach the amphitheater? I presume doctors and people who will invent a vaccine, but who else?
Well, I wanted to say something else in the final phrase, if I may, that I want to come back also in the real life of exhibitions. I want to be again a flaneur in the exhibitions, not seeing any of them online, if there are any.
I couldn't agree more. I'm sort of dying to have that experience all over again. And Fatos, what is it that you would like most? What is it that you miss most in these pandemic times?
Actually, I miss most like meeting young people. That's like what really like drives me in better understanding their needs and also like in the same time their feelings, because sometimes they are very much less given the opportunity and heard of their needs and feelings.
There was a lot of talk about that, especially on the first panel, when talking, for example, about distance learning and so on, how much it means, how much for us humans it means to actually be in one place, to be physically close to one another. I'd like to thank all the panelists, Daniela INGRUBER, Hedvig Morvaj, Adrian Guta, and Fatos Mustafa for their contributions here, and would turn now over to our host, Friedrich FAULHAMMER, Director of the Danube University Krems, for his closing statement. Thank you very much to all the panelists and to the audience for being patient and listening to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Director FAULHAMMER, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nenad. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure that I have the possibility to frame this discussion. I had the privilege to talk to you in the morning, and now at the end of this conference, I again have the possibility to share some views with you. In our conference, we aimed to discuss the economic, societal, and cultural consequences and implications the COVID-19 pandemic has on the Danube region and Europe. And we discussed approaches, examples, and ideas for reflection on a wide range of topics in both panels. Among other things, the challenges the countries of the Western Balkans are facing were impressively described, and the necessity outlined to find a new way of cooperating with the European Union. We have heard about the relevance of carrying out reconstruction in a sustainable and ecological way in the post-pandemic period. It will also be necessary to pay attention to how conventional media and politics will design their communication with the people, considering the impact social media has in its destructive and misleading manner. Just as much emphasis will have to be placed on working for and with young people. And last but not least, the important role of art as a coping strategy for the consequences of the pandemic should not be forgotten. On the one hand, the contributions clearly demonstrated the challenges and risks that Europe is currently facing. At the same time, constructive approaches and encouraging examples of cooperation pointing the way out of the current challenging situation were exemplified today. And as an observer of the discussions of the keynote and the panel discussions, I can say that it was, despite the fact that we are only online, a very lively debate, thanks to our moderators, Erhard BUSEK and Nenad ŠEBEK. Thanks again. Irrespective of the options for action that open up following the path for the Danube region to develop positively will require considerable effort. In my point of view, I would like to stress two aspects. First of all, we should be guided by the overall picture of Europe being united in its diversity, prospering as a major player in the world as we move into the post-pandemic economic period, sketching various scenarios. Europe that relies not only on its economic strength, but also on its diverse culture to provide a source of inspiration and innovative solutions. We should revive this vision of Europe. In this context, I use the term utopia only tentatively. It is a byword for non-place after all. But to me, Europe stands for that place in which the vision of cooperation, of the constructive use of all social forces, as well as the various cultural resources can and will succeed. Secondly, we are seeing repeated lockdowns, border closings, and people sealing off in the current situation. For Europe to take a positive direction in the aftermath of the pandemic, it is essential to keep all channels of communication and cooperation open now. Because finding ways out of the challenging situation of the present requires cooperation across disciplines and institutions. Cooperation at all levels, starting with politics and business and extending to education, culture, and civil society. This is the only way to give momentum to the process of European unification in the future. Dragan PROLE has accurately pointed out in his keynote that physical distancing, which was imposed today as one of the protective measures against COVID-19, should not lead to social distance as well as societal and political distance. The word social distancing is indeed misleading. Solidarity, cooperation and sharing must be at the heart of the strategy to deal with the consequences of the pandemic and to overcome it. Physical distancing may not lead to a worsening of disparities and the opening of gaps. All the more, solidarity and unity are demanded within the Danube region and within Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, it is unclear how the pandemic will end, and its consequences are uncertain. Thus, momentarily, the present stage is part of an era of uncertainty. As I have already mentioned in the morning, times right now are uncertain, partly because they are highly complex. In such a situation, reason suggests that we first make decisions based on sound knowledge and then systematically approach the most suitable solutions. Let me again point out the role of science. Like hardly in any other area of life, science is well practiced in dealing with uncertainty. It lays a safe ground from which we dare to enter unknown territory and make decisions even in complex situations. I will now come to an end by drawing a positive conclusion from today's conference. Despite all the challenges, I'm confident that we will successfully master this enormous challenge we have not met for many decades, thanks to the large potential, the creative solutions we have heard about, and the ingenuity of the people in the Danube region. I would like to thank the speakers, the panelists for their informative speeches and presentations today, for successfully hosting the panels online, and all of you for delivering exciting contributions to the discussion. I would also like to thank the organizers of the conference, the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe, for having prepared the conference excellently in terms of content and technology. The ARG Donaulände for the event's patronage, the University of Natural Resources and Applied Life Sciences, Vienna, University of Applied Sciences, Krems, as well as the Europa Forum Wachau for their kind cooperation. And last but not least, the Federal State of Lower Austria for its commitment as sponsor of the conference. Dear participants, even we cannot continue our discussions at the usual get-together with 1 or 2 glasses of wine. I am confident that we will exchange further ideas beyond the virtual conference room that started at this year's Danube conference, which will lead to a fruitful cooperation. In this sense, I wish you continuing discussions, stay healthy, and I really do hope that we will meet in person very soon, and hopefully at the latest in our next Danube conference in November next year in Krems. Thank you very much and goodbye.